is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Donald Trump needs a weak dollar.
Having achieved a soft landing, has the Fed kind of done its job?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Fears over a broader regional war in the Middle East.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, and Lisa Mateo. Quite a weekend and quite a Monday. Paul, futures just continue to deteriorate. Dow futures negative 577, and simple. The bid is yet to be found.
Yeah, absolutely right, Tom. And we've got the dollar strength here, but again, the weakness in the equity markets. Yields kind of hanging in there. The 10-year Treasury yield sitting right at about 4.53%.
Yields are pretty stable, I thought.
Pretty stable.
The Sweeney yield shows that Duke won.
They won big. It was not even close. So Duke is just awesome this year.
People
Carolina,
from Chapel Hill noticed that.
Yeah.
Peter from Chapel Hill emailed in, tell Sweeney to put a cork in.
Exactly. So, Tom, it's all about tariffs today here. You know, the tariffs and the impact on our trading partners and kind of what types of retaliatory measures will our trading partners make as well. So if you wanted a trade war, I'm not sure why, but if you wanted one, you've got one.
Got an eclectic group of guests this morning, conversations that explain the import-export dynamics that we see, some of the history that we see, some of the immediacy. We're going to start strong in the short-term paper markets. Deborah Cunningham will join us from Federated Hermes, and then Kathy Jones.
Yep.
Kathy Jones on fire this weekend explaining the whatnot with her colleague Liz Ann Saunders over at Schwab. In our 8 o'clock hour, the definitive historian on this mess, Douglas Irwin, has agreed to join us for an extended conversation. He at Dartmouth with David Blanchflower and others at Tuck. Thrilled that Professor Irwin could join us. And Damian Sassower, you know, you make light of Damian.
Sure.
I mean, I think he's bet the house in the Super Bowl.
Yep.
But he's expert on the litmus paper of this global system this morning, the foreign exchange market. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning, we're brought to you by BAM Mutual. Paul knows BAM Mutual. They insure municipal bonds that finance essential infrastructure and provide guaranteed income to improve any portfolio. Learn more about municipal bond credit quality. Visit bambonds.com. I need to spell that on a Monday. BAMBONDS, bambonds.com. We thank BAM for recent attendance by Paul Sweeney and Alex Steele downtown.
Love those folks down there.
I mean, the breakfast was like
fantastic.
AAA insured breakfast.
Yes,
something
exactly
like that.
Right.
Something like that. Futures at negative 88. From the Interactive Broker Studios, your first Bloomberg Business Flash of the week. Lisa Mateo.
Yeah, President Trump's tariffs really rattling the market. So we'll start with futures right now. We have NASDAQ futures down more than 1.5%, 378 points. Dow futures down more than 1%, 580 points, and S&P futures down 1.5, 91 points. Now we take a global look too. You have the Stock 600 right now down more than 1%. The CAC in Paris down 1.5%. FTSE in London down 1%. Then we go to the yield space. We have the 2-year yield 4.26%. That's up 6 basis points, but the 10-year yield 4.53%, and that is little change. To currencies, a gauge of the dollar hit its highest level more than 10 years. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.7%. The Canadian dollar dropped to the weakest since 2003. The peso sliding. The euro even fell more than 1% because Trump said the EU is next on his tariff list. We go to Bitcoin. Investors kind of dumping those riskier assets like cryptocurrencies. You know, Bitcoin down nearly 2%, just above 95,000. And then Bitcoin buyer MicroStrategy down 5%. Coinbase down 5%. Then we take you over to the auto stocks really taking a hit. Wolf Research actually said the average price of a new car in the U.S. is seen as climbing about $3,000. So we go to GM down 7%, Ford down 4%, Tesla down 2%, and even global auto stocks like Volkswagen down about 5% in Germany, Stellantis down about 6%, Toyota down 5% in Japan. But we'll have more on the other tariff-exposed stocks coming up in just a bit. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Just do that again. That was outstanding. What a great summary there. And I think the parlor game of figuring out what the average car is going to cost more. Paul, what's a Vespa going to do? I mean, you're going to pop $500 on
I don't know.
Vespa?
My Vespa's, it's on the back patio waiting for warmer weather.
It's waiting for charged and ready to go. Speaking of charged and ready to go, Deborah Cunningham joins us right now, CIO, Global Liquidity Tariffs Division at Federated Hermes. We're thrilled that Debbie Cunningham could get us started this morning. Debbie, what do the tea leaves say on trust in the system? What is the interior commercial paper repo out to the 2-year Sweeney yield? What does it suggest this morning?
Tom, it's suggesting some different things. It's suggesting comfort and trust, as you mentioned, in the context of the central bank, and certainly Chair Powell and their independence and remaining so, not bowing to the pressures of lowering rates just simply because the president wants lower rates in the economy. They also are committed to watching what happens on a day-to-day basis from a data dependency standpoint. And although Powell won't commit to reacting to changes and pressures from a new administration standpoint, fact of the matter is, when you look at what you just covered, for the last 5 minutes, everything that's going on over the weekend, everything that went on last week, the weekend before that, it's inflationary at best. The potential for tariffs, taxation changes, regulatory changes, immigration changes, all of those, when you put them together, and even on a singular basis with each one of them, have implications from an inflation standpoint. So, the predictions this year from a tea leaf standpoint across the yield curve, the short-term yield curve, range from two rate cuts and then done, to maybe still 4 rate cuts, to 2 rate cuts at the beginning of the year, a pause, and then 2 rate increases by the end of the year. So it's all over the map. And I think it has to do with negotiations with the various countries, what in fact is impacted from a goods and services standpoint, and getting down into the detail once we know it a little bit better.
So, Debbie, what do you think? How do you think the Fed is kind of sitting back and assessing what's happening here today with these tariffs? How does that kind of impact their view here? Because the economic data seems pretty darn strong across the board.
It is very strong, and certainly the consumer is strong. And, if the consumer remains strong, prices go up. That's a bad thing from an inflationary perspective. I think, Chair Powell has said it a couple of times, and I, have confidence that it's a true statement, not just a statement. And that is, it's too early to react. There's so many things that are affecting this yield curve in the front half of the year, not to mention the debt ceiling, and what that means from an extraordinary measures, from an X date, all those certain things, supply and demand. So there's very specific things that are affecting this front end of the yield curve. On the other hand, when you look at something that's a little bit more not temporary in nature, as we all know the debt ceiling is, you think the impact can be fairly high from an inflationary perspective. But if the consumer itself is strong enough, if employment remains strong, if earnings from a company standpoint remain good, which we've seen them, start out that way for the fourth quarter, and that will continue as we go into the month of February. Ultimately, I think you potentially could be back to a tightening cycle at some point. We're not predicting that. That's not what our house call is at this point. But I think the potential is not zero.
Debbie, one final question this morning, and it's just simple. Larry Summers over the weekend, thank you, David Weston, for his commitment to Mr. Summers' thoughts. Yep. And Lawrence Summers made very clear there's stag and there's inflation. I would suggest they happen at 2 different times. Pretty much the consensus, Deborah Cunningham, is that the inflation happens now and the stag happens later. What will you monitor in your yield space to tell you the shift from inflation down the road to the stag?
I think, Tom, it's all about the consumer. You have to look at the weekly payrolls numbers. Look at the monthly payroll numbers, the weekly unemployment statistics. The information, I think, across regions is very helpful. So looking at all of the various regional indices, I think will give us some information. Health from a credit perspective. So looking into some of the banking portfolios and their credit card portfolios and how they're performing.
Right.
And all of that, I think, gives us a better picture of the consumer, which I believe will continue to drive this economy. It's not the only factor, but I think it's the biggest factor. And if you see that slow down, if you see that start to take a pause, or specific sections really not contributing, to their part, that's a big red flag.
Debbie, thank you so much. Debbie Cunningham with Federated Hermes. On fire this weekend with some important notes. Kathy Jones joins us, Chief Investment Strategist for fixed income, but much more at Charles Schwab as well. Kathy, I thought Liz Ann Saunders was brilliant this weekend, your colleague, where she said, we're all looking at imports. Avocados from Mexico. Kathy Jones has guac. 3 or 4 a day.
Yeah, sure.
Lisa's got a 5-gallon container of guac for the Super Bowl. But as Liz Ann says, Kathy, it's also about exports. Do you look for a slowing economy after the inflation soiree?
Yeah, we do. I mean, one of the things about tariffs is it moves and it has its impact in sequences over time, right? So initially you get the price impact of import goods going up in price. So your avocados and cars probably, certainly energy prices, and we're seeing that reflected in the market. But we're also a major exporter of goods. And one thing that I think people forget is we export a lot of agricultural goods, and a lot of that goes to China. We're putting tariffs on China. Last time we did this, it had an impact on our exports, and we lost a fair amount of market share to China for soybeans, corn, pork, those kinds of things that went to Brazil and Argentina. And we have to pay attention to that because, when we lose those exports, it worsens the trade deficit, doesn't improve the trade deficit, and it slows economic growth. So if you're in the farming community right now, you've experienced this. Now, they got subsidies last time, but, this is not a good dynamic because you permanently become an unreliable supplier. And your buyers go elsewhere.
The subsidies, Paul, is a huge deal. Like, we had tariffs last time, but we basically wrote a check to the American farmer
right.
Is a simplistic statement.
The farmers are concerned here. We heard that from Deere.
Yeah.
Kathy, talk to us about just in a world where you have, I guess, these tariffs taking effect tomorrow, there is some inflation concerns stemming from these tariffs in addition to maybe changes in immigration policy. How do you account for that in the fixed income market?
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to do. We're going to watch the real yield because I think the market there, we're going to watch the break-even rates and the tips market as an indication of where the market expects inflation to go, where those inflation expectations will therefore translate to the real yield. And we're seeing a little bit in the slope of the yield curve too. So what we're seeing is short-term rates edging up on the expectation that, look, the Fed can't cut rates when we have this inflation impact. But long-term rates are kind of flat, maybe edging down a little bit on the growth expectations. So we're going to have to pay attention to where it's showing up in the market, but the shift in the yield curve would be where I would be looking.
In terms of credit risk, do you want to take credit risk in this type of uncertain environment? Again, inflation concerns may be just kind of off to the side here and ready to rear their head here. What type of credit risk do you want to take?
Yeah, the trouble is that the credit spreads are very, very narrow, very low, and it doesn't give you much room to maneuver. And so we wouldn't be looking at taking credit risks to the extent that the stock market is selling off, and this has an impact on some industries. I would say that, I would not be taking a lot of credit risk now. I'd be pretty cautious.
Kathy, let's leave it there. I got some shaky audio this morning. We'll let you get back to writing important notes. Kathy Jones, Chief Investment Strategist at Charles Schwab this morning. We now go to surveillance guacamole expert Lisa Mateo. I mean, Lisa, I'm looking here at the substitutes for avocado. I would suggest as a complete amateur, there is no substitute for avocado. There it is. Mashed banana.
Nope.
Hummus.
Nope.
Nut butter. Well, how do you pronounce it? Chia, C-H-I-A?
Oh, chia.
Chia. Chia seeds. Greek, I can pronounce Greek. Greek yogurt.
Greek yogurt, yes.
How about
yes.
silken tofu?
No.
I'm
How
not
about
a
just
fan.
some salsa?
But-
If you're not going guac, can you not just go salsa?
Well, you know what it is.
But
Sometimes
that's the tomatoes.
Oh, there you go. All right.
Then you can't go either way. But sometimes you use it for
60%.
different things. Yeah.
60% of our fresh fruit, our fresh vegetables
Yes.
rather, come from Mexico.
Yes.
Bar didn't know this because Michael hasn't had fresh
Fresh fruit-
vegetables
no,
in his house since Nixon was president.
Yeah, I just don't eat vegetables. It's like,
They skip that right there.
Yeah.
But you can use it. You can on my sandwich now instead of avocado, you do the hummus. See, like how you
you're
just said.
killing
And the
me.
tuna fish instead of
See the
avocado, you
enthusiasm?
use
See the
Greek
enthusiasm?
yogurt.
I know.
She could be press secretary for the president. Folks, forget the avocado. Hummus.
The
is
last
well.
household you want to be at the Super Bowl is the Mateo household, I think, because there's no fun stuff there.
But we're having guac.
You're having guac. Oh, you are having guac.
We have
Okay,
to
good.
have guac.
Bloomberg has a huge Canadian operation.
Yep.
Good morning to all of them working like 24/7 overnight. And I tuned into the Toronto Globe and Mail, and it was really interesting to see the fury there. I know we have coming up Lisa talking about Canadians' responses to all this is a little delicate.
Some of the hockey games and
Yeah, we'll have that coming up.
Yep.
Again, Doug Irwin with us in 1 hour. I can't say enough the honor of, he wrote the definitive history on fair trade 20, almost 30 years ago, and we're thrilled he's taking time from early class at Dartmouth to be with us today. Douglas Irwin with us in the 8 o'clock hour. Futures just simply deteriorate. The Dow negative 600 points. The S&P futures negative 94 points. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. President Donald Trump says Americans could feel some pain from the emerging trade war triggered by his tariffs against Canada, Mexico, and China.
Canada's been very abusive of the United States for many years.
Both Canada and Mexico have pledged to retaliate if Trump follows through on his threats. Staffers of the U.S. Agency for International Development were instructed to stay out of the agency's Washington headquarters today. That's according to a notice distributed to them after billionaire Elon Musk announced President Trump had agreed with him to shut the agency.
Musk says he's handing the U.S. Agency for International Development as a standalone agency and fold what's left of it into the State Department, and he seems to have Donald Trump's blessing for the move.
I think he's doing a great job. He's a smart guy, very smart, and he's very much into cutting the budget of our federal government.
Musk posted on X, USAID is a criminal organization, time for it to die. The staffers of the U.S. Agency for International Development were instructed to stay out of the agency's Washington headquarters today. Musk's Doge teams also spent the weekend gaining access to Treasury payment systems. That is a powerful tool that could be used to track and potentially limit government spending. John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
John, thank you very much. Officials in the nation's capital say the remains of 55 of 67 victims of the midair collision have been recovered and identified. Colonel Francis Pera from the Army Corps of Engineers.
Reuniting those lost in the tragic incident is really what keeps us all going. We've got teams that have been working this effort since the beginning, and we're committed to making this happen.
They plan to begin lifting the wreckage from the Potomac River as early as this morning. Finally, Beyonce has won Album of the Year at the 67th Grammy Awards, delivering her the top honor of the show. Kendrick Lamar won Song and Record of the Year for Not Like Us. Chappell Roan was named Best New Artist. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Taylor was shut out.
I don't know if she was shut out, but
she looked great.
Well,
let's be honest here.
Really?
Yeah.
Thank you for that reporting, Paul.
I thought
Sweeney.
I thought there might have been a proposal from her football buddy.
Football buddy?
Yeah. Maybe at the Super Bowl. We'll
Travis
see.
Kelce?
Yeah.
Oh, come on. They're not going to do.
That's what I'm
going
hearing.
to Disney World.
Yes, exactly
What would
right.
Iger pay for that?
I know.
Taylor, we're going to Disneyland.
World to get engaged with Mickey Mouse.
Best tweet of the day, always from Joseph Weisenthal.
Yep.
With Tracy LOA Oddlots. Quote, "This is really not that much of a sell-off." I couldn't agree more. I just totally agree. We're out on the VIX to 19.71 on a percentage basis. The NASDAQ, 1.8%. I mean, if NVIDIA looks cross-eyed, they go down 1.8%.
Exactly right. So here, but again,
it's measured within the hysteria.
Yep, absolutely right. And again, Tom, the VIX still right around just below 20 on your VIX here. Yields, the 10-year Treasury kind of steady here, off a couple of basis points, 4.51% on your 10-year Treasury.
Deborah Cunningham looking at Frederick Hermes at the 10-year real yield. It's in finally 2.06%. I needed to go under 2.00. This is a global Wall Street kind of statistic, folks. But the 10-year inflation-adjusted yield, there's different ones to look at, but to go from 220 now 2.06. Yep. And if I get a 199 there, that gets my attention. Thank you, Joe Weisenthal, for that important tweet.
And I know, Tom, I know you're looking at Bitcoin. It's 95,000. Weren't we just at 105? I mean, this thing, you blink and this thing moves.
I got stopped out.
Exactly.
I just stopped.
And this thing trades over the weekend. That's what I still haven't gotten used to.
I had a stop-loss order in on BitDog. Stay with us. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Global stocks, equity futures falling. President Trump levied tariffs on Canada, Mexico, China. Those are set to take effect tomorrow. So right now we'll start with NASDAQ futures down more than 1.5%, 389 points. Same for S&P futures, down about 95. The Dow futures down more than 1%, 611 points. Taking a global look, we have the stock 600 down more than 1%. The DAX in Germany down more than 1.5%. Same for the CAC in Paris. The FTSE in London down more than 1%. To currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.6%. The Mexican peso down more than 1%. The Canadian dollar down nearly 1%. And we have the euro down nearly 1% right now as well at 102.63 against the dollar. Now, we talked about autos. Now some other tariff-exposed stocks. We go to tech stocks, whose actually supply chains run through China. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing down 5% in Taiwan. You have ASML, ADRs down 2%. ARM Holdings, ADRs down 3%. Then you go to shares of Constellation Brands, the importer of Modelo Corona beers, down 5%. And finally, yes, Vancouver-based Lululemon shares down 3%. Yeah, workout gear could be subject to tariffs. We'll see what that is.
That's unacceptable.
I know. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now. That is your Bloomberg Business.
I'm learning stuff every day. Lululemon is a Canadian company.
Vancouver, yes.
Wow.
I saw
Big fan of Lululemon.
The leader of British Columbia, I guess they're called Premier. It's not. I thought it was Ann Wilson from Heart,
right?
But it's not. and he said they're going to be very specific. Seriously, the leader of British Columbia, they're going to be very specific in their retaliation against states that voted for the president of the United States. We're going to see this all in the coming hours.
Sure.
And I'd say 24 hours. The response is here. Right now, though, and she knows that Donna May's Diner is the diner in Windsor, Ontario. Kriti Gupta joins us off the platform in London. She spent the early morning monitoring the tariff story, but far more its linkage into stocks. Critty, I guess it's normal, as Joe Weisenthal just said. S&P down 1.6%, but Stellantis Chrysler down 5%. Ford down, I think, 4-ish%. GM the same. I mean, there is a stock reaction, isn't there?
There absolutely is a stock reaction. You mentioned Ford and Stellantis, GM as well down.
GM 7%.
Yep.
Yeah, a whopping 7%. I think it was down 8 or 9% earlier in the session. So really taking a hit on the idea that all the manufacturing, or a good chunk of it at least, happens not only in Mexico, but in Canada as well. So that's just one sector. And you certainly saw it with the likes of Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz here in London as well. You've got the drink makers. We talk a lot about the Modelo's. You just heard Lisa talking about it there in terms of the Constellation Brands hit. Well, Remy Cointreau took a really big hit here in the States. Diageo took a really big hit here in Europe as well. Tequila, yeah, absolutely. Not to mention the kind of hit you're getting from China as well. It's not just a Mexico-Canada story. All the luxury names in Europe are down today.
Critty, so we've got tariffs that are going to be hitting our supposedly closest trading partners in Canada and Mexico, as well as China. What's the feeling? You're in London. What's the feeling in the UK? What's the feeling in Europe? Are you folks over there kind of bracing for maybe the U.S. tariffs will be coming towards the UK and the EU?
Absolutely. Bracing for impact, except the tough part here, Paul, is that whereas the roadmap of retaliatory tariffs from Canada and Mexico, even a little bit from China, have been floated, you can't really do that from Europe. France can't put in 25% retaliatory tariffs. Europe can't put in 25% retaliatory tariffs because that kind of economy, that kind of trade relationship just doesn't exist. And that's really the problem that Europeans are facing.
I'm glad you're bringing this up, Paul. I've been remiss, folks, here at 728 is to not mention it yet. But Europe off Eurodollar is basically slammed equivalent to Canada and Mexico. Critty Gupta, should we see statements today from European leaders, or do they see what cards are dealt?
They're going to see what cards are dealt, because remember, Ursula von der Leyen, of course, at the helm of the European Union, the European Commission, has already talked about an opening offer weeks ago, back in December, after Donald Trump was first elected, saying, it's okay, don't worry, you don't have to put tariffs on us because we will willingly buy natural gas from the United States. That is a door that is already swung wide open in terms of the trade relationship between the EU and the United States. The problem, though, is that steel tariffs are going to be the real sticking point here, because those are the tariffs that were still very much in play under the Biden administration, a continuation from the first Trump administration. They briefly switched to quotas, and that's where you could see kind of the double whammy in the likes of Volkswagen, Mercedes, etc.
Critty, the concern among some folks here is that these tariffs will be inflationary for U.S. consumers. Have you seen any good data out on that?
I've seen a lot of good data on that. Some of these numbers here are enormous. I've heard Capital Economics talking about inflation getting to 3%. Bloomberg Economics talking about core inflation alone getting to 0.7% in terms of an increase. I've heard household incomes, $930 of a drop per person in the United States for the next 12 months off of just the current tariffs that are on the table. And I had to look it up, Tom, you'll appreciate this. The average median income for an American earner is about $66,000. So taking that about $1,000 out of that is quite the crunch. Even cars, for example, car prices going up by $3,000 or $4,000.
Critty, we didn't have you on because of this. Joining us, folks, now from University Park, Texas, and Southern Methodist University, the true queen of guacamole, Critty Gupta. Critty, I mean, Mi Cocina is the guacamole down in the Dallas area. What are they going to substitute avocados with? Give us your guidance.
Oh my goodness, that is I think the biggest tragedy of it all, because in Mi Cocina, what you want to do is you want to get their Spanish rice. It is a completely different kind of experience. Highly recommended. Haven't had Spanish rice anywhere like it. That's really, I think, the question. As long as they have the Spanish rice, I think that maybe they'll be able to do okay without the avocados.
What's your take? I mean, seriously, folks, Critty Goop is definitive on Texas and the huge impact with Mexico as well. For you and the fam, what's the immediate take of a tariff war between El Paso and Nuevo Laredo?
Well, the immediate reaction is that's going to be met with some positivity. Folks, I was on the phone with my parents yesterday, and they were saying that just simply the sentiment, the vibe within Texas has actually changed because they're excited about dealing with this immigration issue, the impact on the states in terms of the economy. People actually think the prices will come down if you deal with the immigration crisis and the border. They're not really thinking about any potential inflationary impact. They're certainly not thinking about what's happening over in Canada. It very much is a focus on Mexico. But if you look at the folks in El Paso or Laredo, for example, even Corpus Christi, they have a lot of families that commute back and forth between Texas and Mexico, and that's really where some of the sting might show up.
Brilliant. Critty, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate that. What I learned there, the Spanish rice.
Right, exactly.
Good morning to everybody down in Texas on your commute. Greatly appreciate your attention on Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, Sirius XM. Channel 121?
Yes,
121,
absolutely.
nailed that. Good morning in Washington, 99.1 FM up to Boston, 92.9. And on YouTube, may I say subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. It's a Texas platform. Subscribe down in Texas, and we need a remote to...
Yeah, let's get down there.
The number 12, a half order of chicken quesadillas, sliced in a Tariff sunk avocado enchilada, or cup of soup.
Okay. Perfect.
Make it Chino.
All right, there you go.
Courtesy of Critty Gupta.
We'll get down there.
The market, a little bit of stasis here, I'll say. S&P futures negative 99. Dow futures negative 633. NASDAQ out 1.8%. Paul, you mentioned GM down bigger earlier and has come back a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit here. But again, you think about the trade from Canada and Mexico for auto and auto parts. Is a big deal.
Huge.
And, so again, we'll see what type of inflationary effects we see from some of these things. There's questions of how long these tariffs will be in place and then the overall economic impact here. But here we go.
Well, out west is fertilizer. But I said to people, I think basically and emotionally, it's that bridge from Ontario over to Michigan.
Yeah, but as Critty was saying, in the folks down in Texas, her family are saying, hey, if to the extent that this can help, mitigate some of the immigration issues down at the southern border, then it sounds like a lot of folks are certainly supportive of this. So we'll see how it plays out.
I think the ratings, the popularity ratings will be fascinating for any and all. I would draw your attention, whether you're Republican or Democrat or disaffected, Rahm Emanuel, our former ambassador to Japan, and of course always affiliated with Chicago, with an absolutely blistering essay this weekend on the future of his Democratic Party. We'll give you a feature on that here as we move forward. Thank you to David Gura for bringing that to my attention. On the data front, I'm looking at dollar. It's still out at a 109 on DXY. The tension, as Paul mentioned, euro, not a dash to parity, but certainly weak euro, 102.22. 102.77. Yen doesn't play. It's basically weaker euro against resilient yen. Sterling a 123.47. Idiosyncratic Turkish lira, it does print further depreciation. Turkish lira prints 36. Where else are you going to get a conversation on guacamole and Turkish lira? There's got to be a Turkish lira substitute for guacamole and avocados. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. The dollar soaring, the stocks falling, though, after President Trump's tariffs really rocked global markets. The levy set to take effect tomorrow. We'll start right here. NASDAQ futures down nearly 2%, 411 points. Dow futures down nearly 1.5%, 648 points. S&P futures down more than 1.5%, 101 points. Taking a global look, you have the stock 600 down more than 1%. The DAX in Germany down more than 1.5%. Same for the CAC in Paris, and even in London, it's the FTSE in London down more than 1%. One market doing pretty well from the start of a new trade war, that's oil. Want to point that out. Brent crude up is at $76 a barrel, up more than 1.5%. WTI crude $74 a barrel. That could soon feed into higher gas prices for American drivers. We shall see. We go to currencies. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.6%. The Mexican peso down more than 1.5%. The Canadian dollar down 1%. Trump's tariff plan has the agricultural market on edge. We've been talking about this. Shares of farming equipment maker Deere down 4%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
And Lisa, thanks so much. SPX just goes through 100, negative 102 on Standard & Poor's. That's a deteriorating tape, and the VIX near a 20, 19.90. All weekend, in anticipation of a 4-hour conversation with Henrietta Trays, we're going to squeeze it into 7-8 minutes here. Henrietta Trays, Barbara Boxer, a good 8 years ago, Senate 1229, a bill to amend the Agriculture Marketing Act of 1946 to blah, 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 standards applicable to all domestic imported Hass avocados. How do Congress people and Senate people explain to this president the minutia they deal with in our foods, our imports, our exports of what we eat?
Oh, let me just say, I am endlessly impressed with the way that you come up with legislation and tie it into these conversations. It's incredible. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the impact of the agriculture sector, you're hearing from America's farmers now in some of the most popular leaders of these trade associations coming to the Republican conference and saying, you know, the retaliation that's going to come our way is the other side of this that's not being discussed enough. Sure, your avocados are more expensive if you're importing them from Mexico, but we need the potash from Canada. We can't have fertilizer. We don't have the employees. You're also cracking down on immigration. You've eliminated TSP status, or temporary protected status for Venezuela. That's over 300,000 individuals right now. The combination of what's coming is something that I think you're going to hear from the farm states more than anything else, because of course, front line. And we've already passed $50 billion worth of bailouts for those states since Trump started these trade wars, and it's going to continue.
What's the timeline on that? I mean, what do they do, Paul? Have lunch with the president on Tuesday or Wednesday and say, hey, here we are? The leader of British Columbia, Paul, says he's going after states that voted for the president. I mean, it's that surgical.
Henrietta's, I mean, how much support is there in Washington for these tariffs? It's, you know, a lot of folks are saying this is a solution in search of a problem here. What's the feeling in D.C.?
It's this fine line between not enough votes to impose tariffs from Congress and collect the revenue that can actually be counted towards the tax bill, but also not enough votes to strip away the power that Trump has to impose the tariffs. So it's this middle line, and you're right to think of these individual states. Both of the senators from Kentucky, Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul, have been some of the only outspoken senators to tweet about how opposed they are to these tariffs and how counterproductive they are. And, you know, there's a reason that we stopped this after Smoot-Hawley. It is economically painful, and there are no winners in a trade war. There's just retaliation.
Henrietta, what's let's get past the tariffs here. What's really key over the next week or two in Washington, D.C. for this Congress?
Well, this is supposed to be a really big week. The House Budget Committee is supposed to come in and mark up their budget resolution, which will unlock reconciliation authority and allow Republicans to pass a Republican-only tax bill and a military spending bill, an immigration bill later on this year. That is already being pushed back because they do not have an agreement on what the deficit appetite is in their conference. It's going to have to be at least $2.5 trillion if Trump is serious about having no taxes on tips and no taxes on Social Security component added. we need more than $3 trillion in deficit increases. They do not have the votes for that. And so the budget committee markup that was expected to be this week has already effectively been delayed. If it happens next week, that'll be impressive. They're going to go on recess the following week, and then they'll come back in late February, and they'll have to negotiate with Democrats who, by the way, are not inclined to help the administration at all right now, or the Republican conference. And a government shutdown is a 20% prospect in my view.
Senate 1113, Murkowski of Alaska. Murkowski of Alaska. The bill's so long, title, Paul, I can't read it all. It's on potash. Explain to me fertilizer in Western Canada, Henrietta Treyz. What is the dynamic that's going to happen here? I mean, what's Chrystia Freeland going to do, or anybody in Canada, in Toronto, about way out there in the west of Canada?
Yeah, this is exactly what Canada has been telegraphing since Trump won the election, and definitely since January, which is that they know that there are certain elements and critical minerals that they have that we need, that they're considering putting excise taxes or export taxes on. Potash is just one of them. Uranium, zinc, aluminum, copper, nickel, all of those components we need. Our farmers specifically need the potash. I forget what the number is, but like 83% of our potash comes from Canada. That's what the farmers need. And so when you think about that as an American voter or as a consumer, all the costs of your farming goods, your food that you buy at the grocery store will now be more expensive.
This is important to have Henrietta Treyz on, because my total knowledge of Western Canada is Nicky, Wild Dog of the North.
Right.
You know, it's like the yearling. Michael Barr and I saw Nicky, Wild Dog of the North like 6 times when it came out. I mean, that's it. Yukon, that's all I know.
Henrietta, you guys have a football game coming up in your town this weekend, right?
Yeah, it's wild down here. I've never been in a city with the Super Bowl. It's crazy.
So, I mean, New Orleans can, you guys deal with big events. Are you ready for the Super Bowl?
We are professionals. We were born ready.
Exactly. So
come on now.
Henrietta, just real quickly, do we have any more big confirmations coming in the next days?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The one that I am most excited about, there's all the, media attention around Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr., but the big one to watch is Jamison Greer. That's on Thursday. He's going to be President Trump's next USTR, the new Bob Lighthizer. When we think about the trade war with China, he is the most important player in the game. So his hearing before the Senate Finance Committee, which is occupied by all of Republican leadership and a host of farm state senators, are going to get an earful, particularly if these tariffs go into effect tonight at midnight.
All right, Henrietta. Thank you so much, Henrietta Treyz, managing partner at Veda Partners with our news in New York City. Here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul, Tom, and Lisa. President Donald Trump says Americans could feel some pain from the emerging trade war triggered by his tariffs against Canada, Mexico, and China.
Canada's been very tough on oil, on energy. They don't allow our farm products in, essentially. They don't allow a lot of things in, and we allow everything to come in. It's been a one-way street.
Both Canada and Mexico have pledged to retaliate if Trump follows through on his threat set to launch tomorrow. Elon Musk now has access to the federal government's funding agencies after President Trump granted him access to the U.S. Treasury Department. Musk speaking on the first Dogecast's Spaces event on X is going after congressionally approved programs with foreign assistance going through U.S. aid and his main focus.
The reason for that, as opposed to simply, trying to do some minor house cleaning, is that as we dug into USAID, it became apparent that what we have here is not an apple with a worm in it, but we have actually just a bowl of worms.
Musk went on to say USAID is a criminal organization. Authorities say they have recovered the remains of 55 of the 67 people killed in last week's plane crash in the nation's capital. John Donnelly of the Washington, D.C. Fire and EMS Department says they are committed to the dignified recovery of remains as they prepare to lift wreckage from the Potomac River as early as this morning. Donnelly also says he has spoken with the families.
They are a strong group of families that are focused on getting their loved ones back, and I think that's the appropriate place to be at this point.
And officials in Philadelphia have located the black box of the medical flight that crashed in a crowded city neighborhood Friday night. All 6 people on the plane killed, 1 person on the ground died. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with the Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. SPX deteriorates from a negative 98 to negative 104, down 1.7%. I got a Dow deteriorating negative 600, negative 630, now negative 670, down 1.5%. Paul, 2% down on NASDAQ.
Yeah, we got the S&P off 400, the NASDAQ
VIX
off
through 20.
Yep, NASDAQ off 420 points, 1.9% here. So a little bit of pain here as the market digests these tariffs.
Watching the euro as well, 102.68. Please stay with us. We'll do more data checks this morning for you. On YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts.
Now a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines on Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, and Lisa Mateo.
Good morning, everyone. The front page is a Lisa Mateo Hour. It's brought to you by IBKR. Will the U.S. CPI exceed 2.4% in March 2025? Trade your prediction with IBKR Forecast Trader. The yes was recently at 60%. Buy yes or no and earn $1 if you're right. Go to ibkr.com/forecast. Thank you, IBKR. Lisa, what do you got?
Okay, we've been talking about tariffs, so I have to start there. Canadian sports fans are actually letting the U.S. know how they feel about it. They're booing the national anthem sporting events. We're talking from the NBA to the NHL. So this happened yesterday. The Raptors were facing the Clippers in Toronto, and a 15-year-old performer, she got out there, and she was greeted with applause until she began singing the Star-Spangled Banner. Yeah, they weren't too happy about it. Started booing. This is from actually an ABC affiliate. They pulled this down from a social media post, but it's just this growing trend. Like, it wasn't just that game. It was Saturday during the anthem before NHL. You had the games in Calgary, Ottawa too. Last night, Canucks fans in Vancouver, they booed the anthem before their team took on Detroit. So it's this ongoing battle, kind of showing the frustration.
Yeah.
Some fans, though, did say they felt bad, but the majority of them are really
I defer to you
by it.
too, because I grew up in Toronto South, a place called Rochester, where, you know, I mean, I think I was the first one in America to drink Molson Golden.
Sure.
But often. But I don't have a clear thinking on this. I'm just too close to Canada and all that.
I do, but so next.
Moving on. So Michael Barr, you heard him giving the Grammy wrap-ups, right? So I just wanted to do a little bit more on the two voices that were kind of unrecognized. You know, I had a couple of snubs along the way. So yes, Beyonce did win Album of the Year, Cowboy Carter, right? 5th time she was nominated for it. She also won Best Country Album. Her total trophy count now stands at 35, but it was this whole thing, like she kept getting snubbed and kept getting snubbed, and finally she wins it for her country album. And then on the flip, you also have Kendrick Lamar. He got Song Record of the Year for Not Like Us, which actually originated as a Drake diss song, but he was snubbed from that prize 4 times. So all these people who were getting snubbed. He actually, what was interesting is that he beat out Record of the Year over Now and Then, which was this kind of resuscitated Beatles demo supposedly made with AI. But they're just saying it's a victory for rap music because it's only won Album of the Year twice. I mean, I think it was Lauryn Hill and then Outkast. So that was a lot of the talk here. So
you know what the buzz is this weekend? The Weeknd has a new album out.
Oh,
I heard a
look
little
at
bit of
you.
it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Ah.
Awesome. Awesome. Mike Dean is the one putting it together. It's just hugely anticipated.
There you go.
Next.
Oh, and he's also
one
at
more.
the Super Bowl, too, performing. Okay, so Chick-fil-A, they want to make their drive-thrus faster. So this was an interesting look from the journal into how they're using high tech. Like, this was a restaurant operator, Rockford, Illinois. They had this new drive-thru record. It served one car every 13 seconds.
Wow.
But they still want to improve it, so they're looking at different things. Security footage right in the kitchen, but also drones. They're using drones to kind of hover over the parking lot and take footage so they can look at it. And they actually found a few things where they can work on, like veteran workers taking on too many duties, the Wi-Fi used by the parking lot order takers, because they have them out in the parking lot. It didn't extend far enough. So they were kind of getting kicked off the Wi-Fi as they were trying to take in all these orders. And so the company's just using like a lot of these experts. They're dispatching them to like 3,000 of their different restaurants. But the interesting thing is how it's forcing a lot of other food chains who don't normally use drive-thrus to use them. Like Chipotle is starting to use drive-thrus.
Really?
Yes,
I didn't know that.
because of the online orders are so huge. And Shake Shack is starting to use drive-thrus now.
Wow.
Isn't it just complexity of the menu? Like when Paul goes in and gets his triple forple latte.
Starbucks, they're reducing the complexity.
They're reducing the complexity.
Because apparently the amount of combinations you can use on a Starbucks menu is mind-boggling. So I'm going to try to
Lisa
simplify
Mateo,
that.
thank you so much for the news this morning, the newspapers. Song of the year, let's go back. U2. It took them 6 years to figure out this song. U2.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
What do you say to people scared stiff in cash?
We've got an administration, presumably, that will be pro-business, lower taxes.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
The president is focused on geopolitics.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. We welcome all of you to Tariff Monday. In the last hour, guacamole avocados, a substitute for that, front and center. Douglas Irwin at Dartmouth will not be talking avocado substitution, but we are honored to bring you, after Paul Krugman 10 days ago or so on tariffs, Douglas Irwin of Dartmouth College. We will get to that here in a moment. Futures deteriorate, negative 104. Dow futures even further down, negative 675. The VIX out 3 points, 19.92. Paul, I had a 20 on the VIX here moments ago.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. So a little bit of volatility coming into the marketplace here today. The Dow, just if you're looking for big numbers, off 675 points in futures, Tom.
Gold up $12, 28.47. Wow. A dash to 3,000 on gold, that would be shocking.
Well, I mean, it's just been amazing. I mean, it's Dennis Gartman who's been buying gold with his, yen, Japanese yen. He's been buying his gold.
Yes, we'll have to see on that. From the Interactive Broker Studios, Lisa Mateo, our Bloomberg Business Flash.
Yeah, and the tower is really rattling the market, so let's get right to it. We'll start with NASDAQ futures. Down nearly 2%, 418 points. We have Dow futures down 1.5%, 677 points. We have S&P futures down more than 1.5%, 104 points. So we take a global look. Now we go to the stock 600, down more than 1%. The DAX in Germany down nearly 2%. Same for the CAC in Paris. The FTSE in London down nearly 1.5%. We go to the yield space, the 2-year yield at 4.23%, up 3 basis points. Then you have the yield on the 10-year, 4.98%, and that's down 4 basis points. To currencies, the gauge of the dollar hit its highest level more than 2 years. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.6%. You have the Canadian dollar, that dropped to the weakest since 2003. The peso slid as well, and even the euro fell more than 1% because Trump said the EU is next on his tariff list. We go to Bitcoin. Investors kind of dumping those riskier assets like cryptocurrencies. We have Bitcoin down more than 2% at just over over 94,000. And then you go to MicroStrategy, Bitcoin buyer down 7%, Coinbase down 6%. And you can't forget the auto stocks taking a hit because Mexico and Canada play this big role in a lot of companies' supply chains. You have GM down 7%, Ford down 3%, Tesla down 2%, and even those global auto stocks like Volkswagen down about 5% in Germany, Toyota down 5% in Japan, same for Nissan. We'll have more on other tariff-exposed stocks coming up in just a bit. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate it. He appeared with us a month or so ago, and I talked to the team here this weekend, and I just said, we've got to get Doug Irwin on to sort through this. This conversation is for every elected politician in Washington as they listen on 99.1 FM this morning. Douglas Irwin is an institution. Blanche Flower is not an institution. He's just a macroeconomist.
Right.
Doug Irwin is an institution at Dartmouth College. In his youth, the definitive book, and still fresh, is Against the Tide. It was definitive at the time. More recently, is Clashing Over Commerce. For those of you on YouTube, it's over his right shoulder right now in his book-lined office. Professor Irwin, we are honored that you would attend today. If you were to meet with the congressional leadership today, how should they respond to what the executive branch has wrought?
I would say that under the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, you have power over tariffs. And the problem has been is successive Congresses have delegated so many powers over tariff setting to the president on the assumption that the president will basically act in the national interest and tend to lower tariffs and reach trade agreements, that Congress has given up its authority. So it's time for Congress to stand up and assert itself a bit more on trade. Their constituents will be hurt by many of these measures, and yet the Republicans seem to be very quiet about it.
How will they affect that reassertion? Do they need the judicial branch to support them, or do they just sit down with a beverage of their choice? What do they drink at Dartmouth? It's like Labatt's.
Yes,
they
exactly.
have like Labatt's. Yeah. Doug Irwin, do they have a Labatt's for the president and say, this is too much?
I think you have to look back to the first Trump term when President Trump almost pulled out of NAFTA. And he was convinced by his Secretary of Agriculture and a few congressional allies that that would not be a right move, that he should renegotiate it, because they were pointing to the harm that would be done to his voters, farmers in the Midwest, manufacturing firms in the upper Midwest that depend on exports. And so that sort of helped convince him in terms of a longer run solution of changing legislation to empower Congress more. That's sort of a long run solution to what is now a short-term crisis.
Doug, how do we think about tariffs in a global, intertwined economy? It's not like the 1800s where we imported a relatively small number of goods. We exported a relatively small number of goods. In the global economy, the tariffs, how do they work?
Yeah, you're right. It's actually very different than it was a century ago. A lot of trade a century ago was sort of in final goods or in very basic raw materials. And now what we have is integrated supply chains and international production networks. So the web of commerce and the degree to which firms in all sectors are sort of bound to the global economy in some way is so much more extensive today than it was even 50 years ago, let alone 100 years ago, that tariffs have much more ripple effects throughout the economy. And these proposed tariffs will rip apart North American supply chains and be quite extensive in terms of the reach that they will have.
Doug Irwin, you mentioned Frank Taussig, the giant at Harvard years ago. This is, folks, 100 years ago, writing on tariffs. To me, there's a whole mythology going on right now, whether it's a president's affair with Mr. McKinley from another time and place. We trot back, Lisa mentioned Smoot-Hawley this morning, or we go back to August of 1971 when the world turned upside down with Richard Nixon and gold. Which myth, Doug Irwin, is most wrong?
Well, I'd say the myth that the U.S. economy grew in the late 19th century when we became an industrial power because of the tariff. There's a classic case of correlation not being causation. So there are a lot of reasons why the U.S. became an industrial power after the Civil War up until World War I. We had massive immigration. Not many people in the Trump administration mentioned that. We were the recipient of major capital inflows from Britain and other countries. We were adopting technology from then the technological leader, Britain. We were pretty much open to the world, except in trade. So we did have high tariffs, but they did promote manufacturing a bit. But if you look where the productivity growth was, it was in the service sector. It was railroads, and then later electrification and telecommunications. It wasn't just manufacturing and becoming rich because of the tariff walls.
If you're just joining us this morning, I'm Bloomberg Surveillance, and thank you for joining Bloomberg. We continue with Douglas Irwin of Dartmouth College. Many good guests coming up, including Damian Sassower in foreign exchange, the Dow negative 591. To Irwin of Dartmouth, Paul Sweeney.
Professor, talk to us about these tariffs in the context of they seem to be enacted by President Trump in response to non-economic issues per se, maybe whether it's the fentanyl coming into this country, whether it's immigration policy from our neighbors. Is that kind of the way tariffs should be used, typically are used? How do you think about that?
Well, what's interesting about these is they haven't really been vetted by the Trump economic team. His U.S. trade representative is not in office yet. We've just had the confirmation of the Treasury Secretary, Commerce Secretary to come. So usually when countries impose tariffs, and usually when the U.S. has done this in the past, there's an interagency process where you deliberate and you figure out what is the best case and how can we make these work. And I think these are a little bit in advance of those advanced discussions within the administration. So I think you get this hodgepodge of reasons why we're doing this. It could be the fentanyl flows or the migrants, but we also hear still about the trade deficit. I mean, when President Trump makes these statements, comes back to the imbalanced trade. And he's actually ordered a review on that. But it's very hard for other countries to negotiate when there are 10 different things that are being flung at you in terms of what you're doing wrong.
Doug Irwin, honored to have you here for breaking news. This is from Doug Ford. He is a premier of Ontario. He's basically, Ontario stretches from just north of Hanover, New Hampshire, all the way over to Carleton College in Minnesota. But the Ontario government says they will cancel all U.S. contracts. And what's important is this is, quote, "We're going one step further. We'll be ripping up the province's contract with Starlink." And of course, that has to do with Elon Musk and all that. Doug Ford, service sector hasn't been talked about much. Do you expect service sector to be harmed as much as the goods sector?
Not as much because they're not directly hit by tariffs, but there's a complementarity between trade and services and trade and goods, and the two often go hand in hand. So if you disrupt trade and goods, there's going to be some spillover effects, negative ones, for the service sector as well.
Professor, some of the concerns here as it relates to tariffs, just in general, is that they are inflationary in the U.S. economy. How do you think about that?
Well, I don't think they don't cause inflation in the sense of a sustained increase in the CPI. They are sort of level effects. So they will increase the level of consumer prices and industrial prices. So that will lead to a bump in measured inflation. It's not clear that the Fed has to respond to that. But what that means is the declining real income and purchasing power of those businesses and households. Right. I mean, just to give you a personal example, which I shared on social media, yesterday I got an email from Irving Oil, which provides us with propane, saying that any tax that's levied on them as they ship propane from Canada to the U.S. will be directly added to the bill that we're facing here in New Hampshire. So even before the tariffs took effect, we're already being warned prices are going to go up.
Lighthizer, and it's on my table at home. No trade is free. Robert Lighthizer focused on China. Lighthizer pushed aside in the second Trump administration. Doug Irwin, on a 10% tariff on China, how would you suggest Beijing will respond?
Actually, I'm a little bit less worried about China, and I'm a little bit surprised we're going after our allies and ripping up North American supply chains by going after Canada and Mexico. I mean, the big rival to the U.S. and big problem in terms of trade has been China. And yet President Trump has de-emphasized that. So I'm not going to agree with Robert Lighthizer on many things, but to the extent that he's focused mainly on China, I think that's where the administration has to look too.
So, Professor, how do you think the governments of Canada and Mexico should respond, will respond? I mean, how deep is this going to go, do you think? How long will this go, do you think?
Well, it's very interesting. There's a report that the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, will be speaking with the President today. So I'd say there's a small chance things could get averted, even though I wouldn't be too optimistic about that. But I think they're responding in the way that actually they did, at least Canada did, with the Smoot-Hawley tariff in 1930. That is, not to take it sitting down, to retaliate. And they're very strategic in terms of the goods that they put pressure points on that are important in the U.S. When putting those tariffs on. So they try to impose tariffs on things that will maximize the political harm in the U.S., but the least economic harm for Canada because there'll be substitute products that they can import.
Doug, the world stopped for Against the Tide, an intellectual history of free trade 30-some years ago. The final chapter, 30-some years ago, page 217, the past and future of free trade. Okay, WTO. I was in Jimmy Chang's office in Hong Kong the day WTO collapsed. Doug Irwin, what is the future of free trade after GATT, after Uruguay, after WTO, and now Trump? What is the future?
Well, it's going to be a bit of a mess, and it could be basically redrawn lines of trade based on geopolitics. But, most countries, speaking outside of the U.S. now, most countries have a tremendous stake in the trading system and open trade. They're much smaller economies. They've opened up over the past 30, 40, 50 years or so. They received economic benefits by and large from that. And to undo that is harmful for them. So I think even if the U.S., because of our politics or what have you, move in a different direction, the rest of the world will still be open for business to the extent they can.
I mean, Doug, I know hitters like Jamie Dimon are listening, Brian Moynihan and others in banking, maybe Christine Lagarde. Good morning, Madam Lagarde, and your team in Frankfurt. Doug Irwin, on the x-axis, forget about J-curve dynamics, I don't buy it. On the x-axis, Professor Irwin, we shift from an inflationary dynamic of tariffs over to the growth or less growth dynamic. On your time continuum, what's the when of that? When do we shift from a study of inflation higher to growth slower?
Well, there have been a lot of independent forecasts of these Trump tariffs from the Tax Foundation, from the Peterson Institute for International Economics, and from other entities. And none of them have any positive effects. It's always negative. And the question is, given the scenario, how negative you go? You shave 0.2, 0.3, 0.4% off of GDP. Those are sort of where the numbers are coming in. And those will come in fairly quickly. If we actually see the tariffs go into effect on Tuesday, we'll probably see, certainly by the second or third quarter, somewhat slower growth. Now, once again, that doesn't mean it's pushing us into recession, but it just means that after a year or two, our real GDP will be lower than it otherwise would have been.
I got one final question, Doug. You're sort of up in, the edge of Canada.
Yeah.
Hanover's really
I don't know.
I mean, it's on a Connecticut river, and it's sort of like New York North.
I don't know. Those are hardy people up there.
They're hardy. Yeah, it's a Dartmouth bubble.
Yes.
What are you telling somebody over a cup of coffee this morning, Doug Irwin, in Victoriaville, Quebec? You're at a diner in Victoriaville. What are you telling them to do? What should Canada do?
Canada was very savvy during the first Trump term. They made we talked about Congress. We opened our discussion with Congress. They realized that maybe the administration was not going to be very sympathetic, but members of Congress are, because they are much closer to how their constituents will be affected by this. And so they worked state legislatures, they worked on Capitol Hill, and tried to create an environment where it constrains the administration in terms of how much they can push things and what they can do. So there may not be much support for Canada in the White House, but there are other pressure points in the business community and in state and legislatures and elsewhere that they can try to contain the damage that will be done to them from these tariffs.
Douglas Irwin, honored that you could attend. Go back to class, get the chalk in your hand, and teach the
Okay,
sheriffs.
I won't tell Blanchflower what you said.
Okay, don't tell him. He's probably down in Florida right now, distant from the tariffs. Doug Irwin, thank you so much. And to David Blanchflower, thank you so much for his support of all of Dartmouth economics. Futures up 3, little better tape. Stasis here in the last 20 minutes. The Dow negative 670 down to negative 555 now. A better tape. Irwin making for a better tape. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, Lisa. President Trump says he will speak with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Mexican officials today. This comes after the president signed an executive order that imposes steep new tariffs on goods from Mexico, Canada, and China. Canada responded hours later with retaliatory tariffs of its own, while Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum ordered retaliatory tariffs on a range of U.S. goods. Trump spoke to reporters at Joint Base Andrews, Maryland, Sunday night.
We may have short-term a little pain, and people understand that, but long-term, the United States has been ripped off by virtually every country in the world. We have deficits with almost every country, not every country, but almost.
Energy imported to the U.S. from Canada, including oil, natural gas, and electricity, would be taxed at 10% under Trump's tariffs. Elon Musk now has access to the federal government's funding agencies after President Trump granted the billionaire access to the U.S. Treasury Department. Musk, speaking on the first Dogecast, a Spaces event on X, is going after congressionally approved programs with foreign assistance.
To be clear, in shutting down, which we're in the process of doing, shutting down USAID.
Meanwhile, a U.S. aid notice instructs staffers not to go to agency headquarters today after Musk said President Trump agreed to shut it down. Beyoncé finally won the Grammy that has eluded her. She won Album of the Year at the 67th Grammy Awards last night for Cowboy Carter.
I just feel very full and very honored. It's been many, many years.
Audio courtesy of CBS Recording Academy. Kendrick Lamar won Song and Record of the Year for Not Like Us, and Chappell Roan was named Best New Artist. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
It is an agglomeration, a conurbation. The Detroit-Windsor region, 6 million people. If it was a separate entity, it would be the 8th largest city in America. We go to our Detroit-Windsor correspondent, Michael Barr. What's it like going across that Ambassador Bridge?
Well, it used to be easy, and I'll let you in on a little secret. I spent a lot of time in Canada. My parents, they had a little cottage in Ontario in the Rondeau Bay area, and every weekend we would go fishing and this and that, whatever. So, I mean, that was an easy thing. Now, if we still had that cottage, I don't know what in the heck would happen.
Post 9/11, did it become much more difficult to get across? Is that?
Well, it started with that because then you had to have a passport. And then once COVID hit, they shut the border down.
But I mean, come on, a domestic beer in Detroit is $6. The same beer in Windsor, Ontario is $4.75.
Oh, that's worth the trip.
That explains right there, a road trip.
Look, that's love lots.
Did you really go over and buy beer at the Canadian liquor stores?
Ooh, is my
no
wife
one's listening.
Oh, okay. Heck yeah.
You did. And you snuck it over the border.
Yes, I did. It's more potent.
You did. And I hear right now the gentleman, Mr. Ford from Ontario, is moving the U.S. products out of the Canadian liquor store. Thank you for that. A Detroit-Windsor agglomeration reporter, Michael Barr. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Oracle. Attention growing businesses. Oracle offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. For new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment, offer ends March 31st. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. All right, we've got global stocks equity futures in the red. This is after President Trump levied those tariffs on Canada, Mexico, China, set to take effect tomorrow. We'll start with NASDAQ futures down more than 1.5%, 370 points. We have Dow futures down more than 1%, 582 points. S&P futures down more than 1.5%, 93 points. Taking a global look, the Stock 600 down more than 1%, with the DAX in Germany down more than 1.5%. Same for the CAC in Paris, and the FTSE in London down more than 1%. The two-year yield, 4.23%, down up 3 basis points. We have the yield on the 10-year, 4.49%, and that's down 4 basis points. To currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.5%. We have the Mexican peso down about 1%, and the Canadian dollar down 0.6%. Moving on to the euro, down 0.8% at 102.72 against the dollar. We talked about autos. Now we want to move to some other tariff-exposed stocks like tech stocks whose supply chains run through China, like Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, down 5% in Taiwan. You have ASML, their ADRs down 2%, and ARM Holdings, ADRs down 3%. The agriculture market also on edge. We have shares of farming equipment maker Deere down 2%. And yes, you heard the Ontario government now saying it's going to cancel its contract with Starlink. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. And we'll aggregate in all this news on this Monday. The news flow is something coming out of Canada as they just, Paul, is it midnight tonight?
Yes.
Midnight Tuesday.
Yes.
Is when this clicks in.
Yep.
We're doing some important surveillance research right now. If I was to order a handle, is a 1.75 liter. The kids call that a handle.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
It's called a handle.
Okay.
They're not buying Bombay Sapphire Dry, though.
No.
It's like from Fresh Direct, it's $42.
Yep.
There's some others, $39. We say good morning, Canada.
Sure.
I did the conversion, and you take $62.99 and you divide it by 1.47, and it's a little more expensive, $43 in the Canadian, with the conversion.
Yep.
And then most importantly, and no, Paul, you've never done this.
Nope.
You've gone up to New Hampshire and bought your liquor there and snuck it back across the border.
Yeah.
Unlike Tony Crescenzi, you're not looking in the rearview mirror the whole way. It's clocking in. Are you kidding me? In New Hampshire, it's $32.
Oh, that's definitely worth
for
the
a
trip.
handle.
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
That's, they're doing it right. Good morning, Portsmouth Plaza, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Not that I've ever been there.
No, not at all.
Joining us now after that incredible pricing, expert on short term and really expert on what PIMCO is thinking. Anthony Crescenzi joins us, just definitive.
Morning, Tom and Paul.
Just thrilled to have you here. What is the weekend like at PIMCO? What are you, in a sum statement, saying in Newport Beach in New York about this moment?
Lots of email traffic, lots of back and forth, lots of two-way opinions. I tried to weigh in with the optimistic opinion. PIMCO delivered a cyclical outlook, a one-year outlook a few weeks ago called Uncertainty is Certain. I tried to rename it. I wanted to say that there's more certainties in some areas. There's a lot of uncertainty regarding trade, that's for sure. But isn't there for a business more certainty about the trajectory on regulations and also for taxation? Those are things that matter. So if you look at the small business survey for the last month called the NFIB, you see their uncertainty index plunged because they're confident about some things that matter to them. So we have to take a broader perspective. One quick note, Tom and Paul, on this, like on regulations, for example. When Donald Trump took office in 2016, the Federal Register, a book of all rules and regulations of the U.S. government, was 96,000 pages. The first year plunged to 60,000. The estimate for 2024 is that it rose back over 100,000 pages. You can imagine that'll be trimmed massively. Mm-hmm. What does it mean? It means it could be disinflationary forces along with the inflationary forces that we're hearing a lot about, especially over the weekend, regarding tariffs. So think holistically, think about the entirety of the policies of the administration.
I mean, brilliant. Paul, I'm fascinated to see what President Trump's polling is. How's he doing kind of thing in the coming weeks.
So, Tony, that sounds like a scenario where perhaps in your world of fixed income, maybe you take some credit risk here. How do you guys think about that versus me just clipping my 4.25 2-year Treasury coupon?
This is the bond market is a target-rich environment. There's much to do. There are yields between 5 and 7% for high-quality fixed income. By high quality, we mean what the rating agencies say are A-rated, BBB rated, and above. A BBB rated bond will have, for example, it's considered investment grade, a 0.13% default history per year. So you get 99.9% chance of getting your money back. So many different securities around the world, you can get yields between 5 and 7. And the starting yield on the U.S. Bloomberg aggregate explains for 94% correlation the return over a 5-year period. So whatever that number is, 5 and 7% today, that's going to be your return the next 5 years. So one final word on credit. It doesn't have to be corporate bonds. There's so much to do. As I said, it's target rich. Weeks ago, Mexico, Saudi Arabia issued bonds in U.S. dollars. Mexico, BBB rated to us and rating agencies, had a yield of 250 over treasuries, 2 net points more than U.S. treasuries. And so if you think, and it's dollar denominated, so you don't have to worry about the currency. If you think that the government of Mexico will pay you back, that's not a bad choice to make over BBB corporates, which are 100 basis points more than Treasury. So lots to do. Target-rich bonds are very attractive relative to history, expected inflation, and expected volatility. Very excited about the run-up in yield as well. This is a second bite at the apple, what we've seen in recent weeks. I was afraid that yields had fallen too fast.
So, I mean, as Tom likes to talk about, I mean, this is, in your world now, you can just play for the yield. You don't have to be, like, really smart on price appreciation, but...
The real exciting thing, Tom and Paul, is looking at forward short-term interest rates. The bond market is priced for the Fed to lower its policy rate to 4%, and then leave it there the rest of the decade. If you believe that the defensive properties of bonds have returned, meaning that bonds will rise when stock prices fall, then you're getting the defensive properties of fixed income for free the rest of the decade, in the sense that if something bad, anything bad happens that drives yields lower, you'll get a great benefit, a total return. So it's really total return time in the fixed income market. Think about the yield plus the potential for a drop in yield from here, and then rise in price. It could go the other way. We could talk about that, but we don't think so.
The summation is, and I don't have it in front of me, but basically the last 10 years on a total return in bonds have been bloody. I mean, PIMCO was built on the great moderation and, adding alpha to that. I mean, Bill Gross is off in Mexico buying Mexican stuff to do a carry trade, but the buying, I don't know what Mohammed was doing.
Great article by Bill, by the way, last week in the Financial Times.
Did you see that? What do you think of that?
I loved it. And what I love most is, and I said this on a stage in Miami last week, I said, there's something more about to asset management than looking at the returns and gathering assets and such. It affects millions of lives. I was in a place, it's a Catholic place, and it reminded me of going to Boys Town in Nebraska. And I saw a picture of Father Flanagan, famous from a movie from 1938 with Spencer Tracy. It reminded me of the importance of the work we do, because the work we do affects the work that other people do, whether it's a pension manager or building a company or a hospital.
I went out there years ago. Mohammed and Bill were on good behavior, speaking terms. The best thing in this article in the FT on William Gross was the photograph. What a mess. And I'm looking there, and over his right shoulder, his Monroe Traders there. Explain to our audience, Tony Cosenzi, how cool it is that Bill Gross had 6 Bloombergs and a Monroe Trader on his desk.
And like a Tonight Show host or any of the Late Show hosts, it seemed his area was elevated above others to give that sense of power. I was looking in that photo to see if I was in it, because I know I was sitting behind him in that photo somewhere, and it's a little blurry, so I'm not sure it was me.
So where's real quickly, Tony, the best opportunity here that you see that you guys are talking about these days?
Simply do not need to reach, if we went in by asset sectors in the bond market, the most liquid expression of credit would be agency mortgage-backed securities yielding 140 over treasuries. But as I said, it's a time you can bosey the heck out of the bond market now, meaning take the big 1,500-page book, find lots of things to do. It's a really great time to be a fixed income active manager.
Yeah. I mean, for a while, nobody wanted to talk to you at the cocktail parties because you had no interest rates. You had no carry.
And lots of uncertainties. Just stay invested. All the history is on the equity market, the bond market. Stay invested. You missed the few best days, and you missed a giant portion of the return over time.
Don't be a stranger. I'll talk Staten Island next time. Tony Cosenzi, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
So much. With the Pacific Investment Management company there. And again, the FT article on one William Gross. We say early good morning to Bill Gross out on the left coast as well. The tape improves. We are negative 100, negative 104 on SPX, now negative 93. Dow was negative 650, I think. We're now negative 578. NASDAQ negative 1.7%. Russell, Lori Calvasina's fault, negative 2%. The VIX did get to a 20 print, now 19.67. I like what Joe Weisenthal said. This is really not as bad as it could be. Stay with us for breaking news on Canada and Mexico. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got the dollar soaring, stocks falling. This is after President Trump's tariffs really rock global markets. The levies set to take effect tomorrow. We'll start with NASDAQ futures up more than 1.5%, 399 points. Dow futures up more than 1%, down more than 1%, 622 points. And S&P futures down more than 1.5%, 99 points. The global look, you have the stock 600 down 1%, the DAX in Germany down about 1.5%. Same for the CAC in Paris, the FTSE in London down 1%. So we go to the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, up about 0.7%. The Mexican peso down more than 1.5%. The Canadian dollar down nearly 1%. And we even go to the euro, down nearly 1% at 102.66 against the dollar. Right now, I had a check-in with commodities. We have Brent crude $77 a barrel, WTI crude $74 a barrel, and we have spot gold $2,809 an ounce. Now, we've been talking so much about tariffs, we have to get to earnings. Tyson Foods up 6%, raised its profit outlook. Stronger chicken profits actually offset the losses in its beef business. And then after the close, it's on to the Dan Ives' favorite, Palantir. And we can't forget, Mag 7 Mania continues this week. We have Alphabet tomorrow, Amazon on Thursday, and in the chip sector, Advanced Micro Devices tomorrow.
Thank you.
Along with Qualcomm and ARM Holdings. We forget about
You're on
all
fire
the
today.
Earnings.
Wait, earnings. We have a read on manufacturing, PMI, S&P Global reports on construction spending, and ISM manufacturing. All of this later this morning.
Jobs Day Friday.
Yes.
Yeah.
Lisa's on fire.
It is.
it's
I mean,
like,
she's not going anywhere. She was thinking take some vacation days this week. People
I think
said,
she's
no,
tanned and
no.
rested.
Yeah,
Did
exactly.
you see her daughter's batting cage out in the backyard?
Yeah.
Holy
She's a player.
mackerel.
She's a player.
She's a
It's
player.
like, the ball's coming. I could never
No, I'm not hitting that.
do it. This is important. As we talked to Douglas Irwin of Dartmouth College here, and he really mentioned, where's the legislative branch? We continue with that on a gentleman from Harvard and now at Yale, Gautam Mukunda, joins us here. And I want to go back to your book, Indispensable, When Leaders Really Matter. Where is the indispensable leadership of Republicans and Democrats in Congress and the Senate, given this upset we have?
Democrats have no idea what they should do, and Republicans have been broken to Trump's will at this point. We've seen just about everybody come in.
Is there a historical precedent to the way, quote, Republicans have been broken, unquote?
In the United States? It's hard to think of one. Even Franklin Roosevelt faced more domestic challenges. Yeah. From his own party than Trump does right now. Just to put this in context, Donald Trump has higher approval ratings from Republicans, just from Republicans. He's essentially nothing from anyone else, than Ronald Reagan or George W. Bush ever did. I think he might actually have higher numbers than Eisenhower did. Right, he is the most popular Republican president among Republicans in the history of polling.
So, what do you think he does with that type of popularity here? I mean, it feels like tariffs are kind of, I don't know, they don't seem like that big a deal to me. I mean, one could argue if you had that type of support, one could do some really big things. How do you think that he and his administration think about their popularity and support?
So the question here, right, is how much do they care? Right, so Donald Trump is particularly sensitive to popularity issues. He always has been, and this might just be an exercise in getting people to bend the knee and sort of defer to Donald Trump. And okay, then there'll be some damage from that, but not catastrophic. But the biggest moves that Trump has made are putting personnel as policy, putting loyalists in charge of the major organs of the major internal and external security organs of the government. And that gives him the ability to put pressure on the opposition in ways that we've never seen in the United States before.
Have you talked to the Secretary of Treasury who darkened the door in New Haven years ago?
I have not talked to Secretary Bessent?
Yeah,
no, I haven't spoken to him yet.
Okay, I mean, I find this absolutely fascinating, and that you're sitting in the pit there doing the Yale management dance with a piece of chalk in your hand. What is your mandate to executives to communicate to their comfortable Republican candidate what this will mean for Carlos Gutierrez, Kellogg's, or Tyson Food, which Lisa just mentioned, with their huge dark meat to China strategy? What do executives say?
So I think the first one is that if they don't realize it now, they will soon. The United States government has been uniquely stable for a couple of centuries, just basically longer than any other country in the world. And American business has been the extraordinary beneficiary of that. If that goes away, it will have consequences in ways that we cannot predict, but that are gargantuan. I'll just say as a general rule, it's when the things that you so deeply believe about the world that you don't even think about them turn out not to be true, that you have the biggest impact. And here is one where the basic underlying principle of everything in global economics and everything in global foreign policy has been the U.S. government kind of knows what it's doing. That assumption is breaking while we speak, and that will change things for it. I'll just give you a couple of quick examples. PEPFAR. So PEPFAR is the program. It's created by George W. Bush to distribute antiretrovirals in Africa. There are statues to George W. Bush in Africa. There are children named after him because of the scale of this achievement. When they put out the spending freeze, people just stopped getting their drugs in Africa the next day. If PEPFAR goes away, the estimate for South Africa alone, just South Africa, is that in the next 10 years, 600,000 people will die. That is the sort of achievement, right? Only the United States can do things like that. It is a gargantuan achievement. It costs the average American like $1 a year or something like that. It's just an insignificant expense. And it buys us not just helping to keep people alive, it buys us sort of acceptance, allies, China.
We're going to pick up on this, okay? Let's not forget this, folks. We got to keep the news going here and be sure Lisa gets enough airtime or she'll have a tantrum. But Gautam Mukunda with us with Yale University, and we're going to come right back to this U.S. aid concept and the challenges that we see away from tariffs with some of the recent weekend government action. Right now, with an improving tape, futures from negative 104 to negative 96. The VIX 19.66. Our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Tariffs on products imported from Canada, Mexico, and China are scheduled to take effect tomorrow. President Donald Trump says Americans could feel some pain from the emerging trade war.
This is retaliatory to a certain extent. Millions of people flowed into our country through Mexico and Canada, and we're not going to allow that. And by the way, we have among the lowest numbers we've ever had of people crossing our border, the lowest numbers since my administration.
Prices are likely to rise on clothes, appliances, and children's toys with 85% of all toys in the U.S. made in China. The CEO of the toy company Basic Fun says the price of a popular toy like a Tonka truck could go up from $30 now to $40 by Christmas. Meanwhile, Canada and Mexico promised swift retaliatory action with tariffs of its own against the U.S. Ontario's premier said his government is ending its contract with Starlink, the Elon Musk-controlled satellite company. Authorities say they have recovered the remains of 55 of 67 people killed in last week's plane crash in the nation's capital. John Donnelly of the Washington, D.C. Fire and EMS Department says he has spoken with the families and kept them informed of the timeline and the operations as they work. Colonel Francis Pera from the Army Corps of Engineers.
All salvage operations will be completed in close coordination with the Unified Command. All of our partners, just really to ensure strict adherence to our central priority that the dignified recovery of missing flight passengers and personnel take precedence.
Portions of the aircraft will be taken to a hangar for further investigation. Officials in Philadelphia have now located the black box of the medical flight that crashed in a crowded city neighborhood Friday night. All 6 people on the plane were killed and 1 person on the ground also died. At least 22 people now reportedly injured, including 3 in critical condition. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Bars, thanks so much. Let's go back deep into the basketball season. December 4th, Duke 84, number 1 Auburn 78. I mean, they don't play again, do they?
No. But Duke, dismantled North Carolina. Wasn't even competitive this weekend.
It wasn't competitive?
No, it wasn't competitive.
Listen.
And that will do it. Duke making another statement. 11-0 in the ACC for the number 2 team in the nation. Flagg was great. Knipple was great. Everybody who played for the Blue Devils did a lot of good things for them, and they beat Carolina handily here tonight.
David Gurr and I were back and forth during the game. Yes, I was rubbing it in.
Let's be nice to Gurr.
Exactly, we need to be nice.
Mukunda wants him on the show.
Best defensive Duke team ever, and it is up for discussion for best Duke team ever. Although my Duke compadres say, "How about 91? How about?"
Yeah, but when is this Connor's last season?
He'll be out. He'll be off campus by April.
Cooper.
Yeah.
Cooper's last season.
Cooper Flagg. Yep.
Wild. Good morning.
You're listening to Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Gautam Mukunda with this Yale University. We're going to get right to it. We were talking about PEPFAR, which is a hugely successful HIV vaccine program in Africa, is one example of things drifting away here. President Trump has huge popularity numbers. I think there's going to be a lot of polls that agree with his speed, his thrust. But part of that is to say to CDC in Atlanta, they can't talk to the World Health Organization. Basically, the global medical system shuts down. What do you suggest the legislature, our Congress, can do about it, if anything?
So Democrats have the ability to essentially bring the Senate to a halt by manipulating rules. Right. So deny unanimous consent on everything, force everybody to be in there. They can do a lot to be obstacles.
Do you see that yet?
No, not at all.
Did you see Rahm Emanuel? He was on Morning Joe this morning. We're efforting Mr. Emanuel here on a blistering essay in the Post this weekend on his Democratic Party.
It's quite astonishing. So not just in the legislature, Gretchen Whitmer has said she wants to cooperate and is out sort of selling the kids' version of her autobiography. Gretchen Whitmer has phenomenal political instincts, so I'm not going to say, well, that's crazy, but it's a surprising tack for her to take. I also wonder if to some extent Democrats are not just looking at the fire hose of things coming out of the Trump administration and saying, any one of these individually is likely to be pretty unpopular, and the combination, not with Republicans, but with most Americans, and the combination of them is likely to be extraordinarily unpopular. So, as we've talked about before, American public opinion is thermostatic. Whatever the president does, people move against it. If you do things that are unpopular, they move against it even more strongly. If you interfere, this is the really striking one, with the Treasury's payment system, which literally touches the life of every single American every day, every moment, people are going to feel that right away, and it is going to have pretty significant consequences. The trade stuff, I agree with you, Paul, that I think at a macro level, the economics on that they're not going to be huge. But the individual people who are hurt by this are going to be hurt a lot, and they are going to scream really, really loudly. And that has political consequences that may be larger than the economic ones.
Are you surprised that maybe we haven't, thank you, Ken, are you surprised that maybe we haven't had someone from the Democratic Party really established himself or herself as a contra voice to President Trump and his policies? I mean, the only person I kind of hear from is Schumer. But I mean, does the Democratic Party need a new voice, a new vision?
It definitely does. The basic problem for the Democrats is not that they lost the 2024 election. That was baked into the inflation numbers. I don't see a scenario where they win that election. The basic problem for Democrats is they are not competitive in 25 states. Right, so it's almost impossible for them to take the Senate. They started a huge handicap, and that is about larger institutional, structural shifts in the party that are pretty severe. You can talk about any, like there are a million different explanations. My favorite one would be an activist class that essentially is educated at Ivy League schools like mine and talks only to themselves and does not have a sense of that. You can see Democrats who are likely to break out of that mold. I mentioned Gretchen Whitmer is a popular one. Two names that people don't talk enough about: Ruben Gallego and Seth Moulton. And I mentioned both of them because, they're both they both went to Harvard, but they're both Marines. They are not part of the activist community where we only talk to, they know how to talk to people who are out of that mold, and they're very good at it.
We're out of time. This has been really informative on an emotional day. The tariffs clicking in here at midnight tonight. Mr. Ford of Toronto and Ontario out with blistering statements today, including walking away from Starlink. And Mr. Musk as well. Gautam Mukunda is with Yale University, and I'm sure we'll hear more from him. I put out on Twitter and LinkedIn the Rahm Emanuel essay, whether you're Republican or Democrat. It is really something to read about the Democrats in the kitchen table in the kitchen. We're doing Songs of the Year of the Grammys today. This is about William Joel, but what it's really about is how transfixed we were over a simple saxophone solo in 1977, the giant Phil Woods.
Unspoken passion, although I might not seem to care. I don't want clever conversation, never want to work that hard. I just want someone that I can talk to. I want you just the way you are.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
I'm sorry, it's a boom economy, and that's what we're adjusting to.
Neither party seems to want to take on deficits at all.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. An important 9 o'clock hour on a Monday before tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and a 10% tariff across the board on China as well. We welcome all of you. Balance of Power, 12 noon today. Joe Matthew, Kaylee Lines really lined up here for some political discussion of this. And Paul, into the market with Damian Sassower joining us here in a bit. I got futures at negative 97, and it's correlated across all asset classes.
Yeah, you talked about emerging markets. You think about some of these tariffs for Canada and Mexico and China, and then who knows who else. And you're going to see that in the emerging market complex, so we're going to talk to Damian about that. Eric Balchunas,
is he scheduled?
Amtrak Acela is on time. That's yet to be confirmed.
That could be with the tariffs between New York City and Philadelphia,
exactly,
right?
On the cheesesteaks.
We'll see if Mr. Balchunas can make it up from Philadelphia here today as well. I want to emphasize it's an improving tape ever so slightly. Sort of the path here is 4 a.m. ugly, 2 a.m. ugly. Then it got uglier. What do you think, Paul? 7 a.m.-ish?
Yep.
7:30, ugliest. And we've come back a little bit. Joe Weisenthal, I thought, out with a brilliant tweet. You know what? It's really not as bad as a lot of people were predicting, but I got futures negative 97, down 1.6%. The VIX was out over 20, basically 15 to 20. Some angst there, but not Lehman panic. Let's get over that. 19.65 on the VIX. I look at the real yield, which, 2.06%, 2.06 in 5 basis points. Begins to show a little bit of global slowdown-ish, along with higher inflation-ish. Lots of ishiness going on today.
Yeah, it's a Monday.
It's a Monday. I guess that's what. Let's do this. She's been on fire this morning. She had 3 visits to Costco this weekend from the Interactive Broker Studios, the Bloomberg Business Flash. Guacamole Queen Lisa Mateo.
Had to stock up on him. Good morning. Yeah, President Trump's tariffs really affecting the markets. In fact, Bloomberg Economics says the new levies may knock 1.2% off of U.S. GDP. Canada may fall into a recession. So let's start with NASDAQ futures. Down more than 1.5%, 387 points. Dow futures down nearly 1.5%, 639 points. And S&P futures down more than 1.5%, 99 points. Taking that global perspective, Stock 600 down more than 1%. We have the DAX in Germany down more than 1.5%. Same for the CAC in Paris. The FTSE in London down nearly 1.5%. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.7%. Then we go to the Mexican peso down 1.5%. Canadian dollar down 0.8% at 146.71 against the dollar. And we even go to the euro down 1% at 102.56 against the dollar. Bitcoin lower as well, down 2.5% at just over 94,000. Bitcoin buyer MicroStrategy, look at them, down 7%. You go to Coinbase, down 6%. Tariffs also affecting the auto stocks. We've been talking about it. So you have GM down 7%, Ford down 4%, Tesla off about 3%. And then global auto stocks, Volkswagen, they're down about 5% in Germany. You have Toyota, Nissan down 5% in Japan. Now, if you plan on buying a new car, you better act fast. Wolf Research said the average price for one in the U.S. could climb by about $3,000. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. What an effort by our team to line you up with conversations to inform on this historic Monday into tariffs at midnight Tuesday. We had Douglas Irwin on from Dartmouth College, Damian Sassower to join us on foreign exchange here in a moment. But right now, it's a name you don't know, particularly in America, but he's definitive in Europe. Ludovic Subran, to say he's chief economist at Allianz, barely describes his study out of Sciences Po and École Nationale de Statistique. I can get it. I can't do it in French. No. In Paris. But Ludovic owns the summation response we're going to see to these tariffs. Ludovic, thank you so much for joining us this morning. What can be a coordinated response to the Trump tariffs, or as Bremer would say, every nation for themselves?
Well, thank you for having me. I think it's a bit the way we feel about the Trump playbook right now. I think Christine Lagarde in a Financial Times article called for the right solution. Let's negotiate with Donald Trump. So I think the coordinated response is we should not try to go for tat, the Italian law, but we should negotiate. I think that's really the way forward. And for Europe, hopefully we negotiate as one, which is also not easy.
How do you negotiate with someone who wants Greenland?
And Panama and Canada. Look, I don't know. It's, as an economist, it's maybe the main reason why I'm pessimistic this year. Is I'm always very optimistic about economics being a construct, going through crises and resilience. But it's true that if you believe that force should replace negotiation, if you believe that protectionism should replace free trade, it's a much harder world out there. I think frictions are everywhere. It's inflationary. It's bad for business. How do you go with someone who has such turfy obsessions? I would say, at least for Europe, it's about making sure that the American people understand how inflationary it could be for some of the imported goods, because we still have a major surplus with the US. And again, you see the stocks reaction. So it's also about making sure we don't create a financial volatility out of thin air, right? So it's a bit about calling for rationality in the economic agents, which is always something that doesn't win easily, but in the long term should.
So, Ludovic, how does Europe, generally or broadly defined, think about tariffs as an economic tool?
Well, look, first, I think there was a wake-up call that came from America, from the first Trump presidency, where we have been naive when it comes to China. And I think there is now a bit more statecraft embedded in our policies. So Europe is now less mercantilist by construction, even though some countries like Germany do not like tariffs. The question is, how do you do when it is about your allies? And I think that's a bit what Europe needs to find now, this distance, this safety distance to the US, which in the past was more a question towards China. And so this beggar than neighbor policies was really looking east, not west. So Europe needs to find ways to negotiate, again, as one, and maybe think about ways to avoid retaliation. And as we've seen in the executive orders that President Trump passed, the fact that it is a self-fulfilling prophecy, especially if we try to meet the same level of tariffs. So I think Europe doesn't like tariffs. Europe wants to make sure America takes them seriously. But for that, they need to talk broader: energy, finance, other critical dependencies, not focus only on trade.
I could just see you, Ludovic, at lunch today at La Tour d'Argent in Paris there. It's the kind of place that Ludovic slides into for lunch. It's absolutely extraordinary. Good morning to everybody on the River Seine. Ludovic, if you're having lunch at La Tour d'Argent, what are you telling people if euro breaks parity? What does that mean to the fancy people at La Tour d'Argent?
It means they should buy euro because the euro will go back up. That's what I would tell the fancy people at Tour d'Argent, that Donald Trump's tariff policy is to strengthen the dollar, but Donald Trump's ultimate wish is to weaken the dollar. To solve this paradox, I think you have to look at fundamentals. And even though the euro goes down and below the dollar, I think it is a short-term blip. The long term is Europe is still a major exporter. So that's what I would tell people at Tour d'Argent.
Ludovic, this has been wonderful. Need to get you on for a longer time next time. Ludovic Subran, chief economist at Allianz, can't say enough about his commitment to international economics. This was scheduled to be a Monday Super Bowl tune-up. But our next guest, Paul, we unfortunately have to talk his day job. We can't talk. I mean, is there any buzz on Chiefs Eagles?
Chiefs Eagles, is that what we're focused on here?
No,
could be. The weekend, having that week lag takes all the momentum out of the season.
Blockbuster
totally
NBA
agree.
trades this weekend.
Yeah, I know.
I mean,
NBA trades, I'm looking.
Before we get into the wheelhouse here, Damien, people really anticipating you on foreign exchange. This trade in the NBA shocked the sophisticates I know in the NBA. Why?
I mean, it looks like the Lakers stole a 26-year-old. I mean, Luka is one of the best players that's ever played the game. Well, my son actually, I have to tell you, he's a pretty smart kid. He actually made a convincing case. He goes, take a look at the starting five now for the Dallas Mavericks. I mean, they're as good as pretty much any top three team in the NBA right now at this moment. They're starting five.
But I can never put money on that.
I mean, but they gave away Luka and they did it for AD. AD moves to the four. Oh, so he's a power forward now. He doesn't have to play center anymore. I mean, it's just it looks like a win for both teams, I guess, in the near term.
Last night. I mean, it's just going to be.
I know it's going to be
okay, we could continue on this, but folks, I said this weekend, I said, just get me Damien. I don't care where he is. Get him off Turks and Caicos as well. If euro breaks parity, if Louis goes through 150, If MEX goes 21.50, dare I say at 22,
23.
What are the ramifications?
So here's what you remember. Just a week ago, I was on this show. This is when DeepSeek and the whole world was coming off. And what did I say to you guys? I said, why is the dollar weakening in an environment that's supposed to be risk-off like this? Well, we've come full circle. We've had a full 200 basis point round trip in the Bloomberg Dollar Index since last Monday. So now we're up on the year, up a full half of a percentage point or something like that. Dollar strength, exactly. But look at where it is. I mean, it's still the devil in the details. It's a rate differential story, Tom. Last week, we had 4 major central banks cutting interest rates in the face of a Fed on hold for longer. And this week, Super Thursday, Super Central Bank Thursday, Tom, we got 4 central banks that are again going to cut rates in India, the UK, Mexico, and likely the Czech Republic as well. So these central banks that are cutting rates in the face of a Fed on hold, it's not good for their currencies, and it's certainly fueling dollar strength here.
What is the significance of selected EM currencies drifting away? Lira, idiosyncratic, a 36 print today.
They cut last week, Tom. It's not idiosyncratic. They cut. South Africa cut. Sweden, the ECB, they're all cutting, and their currencies are taking a beating because of it. This is my point. It's still a carry story underneath the surface.
Underneath the tariff surface.
Exactly.
Okay, my question to fancy economists, I'm going to go to you on this. There's an inflation issue here.
Yes.
And then at some point there's a lower growth issue. With your summary at Bloomberg Intelligence, do you model in lower global growth off of the president's tariffs?
Where are we at? 2.05% real year, 10-year real yield here in the U.S.? I mean, down something on the order of 18 basis points this year alone. And in the face of that, you have 5-year break-evens up something on the order of 26 basis points. I mean, these are massive divergence in inflation and growth expectations.
Dude, so right now, there's no reason to talk to people like you.
Why?
I've got a trade war, a global trade war.
Disney's reporting on Thursday.
Exactly. So emerging markets, is it tough to get people to really think about stability in emerging markets when all this chaos
It's been tough for a long time, Paul.
Right.
It's been tough since 2016 at the end of the commodity super cycle. But let's be really clear here. If
Dr.
you're not,
Lisa, would you like to do some therapy here?
I mean, sorry, guys. But I mean, look, the reality is, I mean, EM has performed really, really well, just not from the perspective of a U.S. dollar investor. And that's a very key point here.
Okay.
If you're sitting in Japan, you're sitting in Europe, you're sitting in Great Britain even, chances are you're in the money across the board in emerging markets. So, it's a matter of perspective.
Right. Where we are right now, we don't know what's going to happen at midnight and on, and we'll get other headlines like we did for Mr. Ford in Ontario.
Nick's going to get a center.
Are we getting towards jump conditions a la 98, 92, and before, where little surprises show up in the SAS-hour continuum?
Man. Now I got to talk my book. So tomorrow I'll be releasing a research deck for Bloomberg Intelligence where we're looking at term structural volatility. We're looking at skew and all these things. And right now, it doesn't look like it's flashing red, although, we still need to see how today trades, right? I mean, if you look at credit spreads, you're not going to know how credit spreads are reacting to the current move in the dollar until really the close of business today. So we got to look at that. We got to basically, I have all my charts ready to go, Tom, but I'm sitting on my hands waiting for the data to come through.
So
why is he in the office? He would be work from home.
I know, it should be.
Well, I know. I got to change the colors, the fonts. You know how things work. Get my
so
charts
where
ready.
is value today in your world? I mean,
So I guess, take a step back and where's value globally? I mean, if you look at, the strategies that have performed well across, FX, equities, fixed income, et cetera, it's been low vol, right? Obviously, any low vol strategy, like a long, short, low vol position in equities has done really well on this move in NASDAQ and the S&P. It's been momentum, trend. They've done well. And again, it's been carry. FX carry underneath the surface is up 1.8% year to date. I mean, just buying the high yielders, selling the low yielders. It's a time-tested strategy that works well.
How do you respond to simplistic statements? OMG, President Trump's going to throw selected global countries into recession.
I looked at this over the weekend, Tom. It's really funny. Wikipedia, I'm going to have to call, it's crazy. I had to remind myself what happened when all those tariffs went through during the Trump 1.0. And if I remember correctly, because I couldn't remember, I'm like, wait, there were $200 billion. I remember $400 billion in tariffs on China. And then they didn't have to pay them, or we never charged them, or it just kind of went away. And I'm not suggesting that's going to happen again by any stretch of the imagination. But I remember people saying these Trump tariffs failed spectacularly the first time around. They never had an impact. And I don't know. I mean, if this is more of the same, which a lot of people are thinking, then, maybe my expectations are a bit unrealistic here.
But my Corona, is that going to cost more?
My avocados, my bell peppers, my fresh cut flowers. $100. No, I mean, look, again, these are rich people problems to have, right? I mean, the dollar is appreciating, and I know our last guest said that Trump wants the dollar to decline. I don't know what Trump wants, but I don't think he wants the dollar to decline. I mean, it's bad. Yeah.
But Damien, away from
Optics.
rich people's problems, what does this mean for the broad middle class of America?
When inflation starts ticking up,
voted for Mr. Trump.
Yeah.
What does it mean for them when inflation picks up, and if we get a slowdown of the economy after that?
Well, what if there are more jobs out there? We have a payroll figure coming out this week to offset that, where people are finding work due to all the policies. And more to the point, what if wages are going up faster than the price than the cost of goods, right?
But does this tariff halt that constructive trend?
Well, I mean, if you're looking at inflation expectations, how could it go up so fast if rents and wages aren't a portion of that, Tom? And so it's all a matter of perspective. And, from the U.S. household's perspective, if the cost of goods isn't going up as, the income they're making on the other side of their balance sheet, it's anyone's guess.
Michael Barr emailed me. He wants me to get this question in. If Taylor was slammed at the Grammys, does that mean the Kansas City Chiefs are fired up? Does that mean the Chiefs are ever more fired up?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the Chiefs. I mean, she was wearing a Chiefs red, if I'm not mistaken, yesterday.
We have a continuum here on
Travis Kelce, big fan, 1.5 point favorite. I didn't really catch much of the awards last night. I did catch the red carpet, though. It was very red.
It was very. I'm trying to look up pictures here and see what that's.
I said the same thing Damien said.
She looked healthy.
Oh,
fantastic.
Okay.
Keep it up, Sasso.
Yep. So Damien and I are on the same page.
Oh, my wife's not listening yet.
Okay. Fortunately, I didn't see the Grammys, so the marriage survives with our news in New York City. Oh, he's coming to the chair. Excuse me. I was going to go on him. Thank you, Ari. We're so befuddled here. I was talking about the marriage surviving. It's one of the great things Michael Barr and I have in common. We're going to get Michael Barr in here with some important news coming up, folks. And Damien, go away. Thank you. Futures negative 98 right now, and that's statistic in red on the Bloomberg Professional Service. The VIX 19.63 as well. Let's see if we can maintain calm. Serious news out there this morning from New York City. Our Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. President Donald Trump says Americans could feel some pain from the emerging trade war triggered by his tariffs against Canada, Mexico, and China.
Canada's been very abusive of the United States for many years.
Both Canada and Mexico have pledged to retaliate if Trump follows through on his threats. Staffers of the U.S. Agency for International Development were instructed to stay out of the agency's Washington headquarters today. That's according to a notice distributed to them after billionaire Elon Musk announced President Trump had agreed with him to shut the agency. Here's more with John
says
Tucker.
He's ending the U.S. Agency for International Development as a standalone agency and fold what's left of it into the State Department, and he seems to have Donald Trump's blessing for the move.
I think he's doing a great job. He's a smart guy, very smart, and he's very much into cutting the budget of our federal government.
Musk posted on X, USAID is a criminal organization, time for it to die. The staffers of the U.S. Agency for International Development were instructed to stay out of the agency's Washington headquarters today. Musk's Doge teams also spent the weekend gaining access to Treasury payment systems. That is a powerful tool that could be used to track and potentially limit government spending. John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
Officials in the nation's capital say the remains of 55 of 67 victims of a mid-air collision have been recovered and identified. Colonel Francis Pera of the Army Corps of Engineers.
Reuniting those lost in the tragic incident is really what keeps us all going. We've got teams that have been working this effort since the beginning, and we're committed to making this happen.
They plan to begin lifting the wreckage from the Potomac River this morning. Beyoncé has won Album of the Year at the 67th Grammy Awards, delivering her the show's top honor. Kendrick Lamar won Song and Record of the Year for Not Like Us. Chappell Roan was named Best New Artist. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
We go to our Oscar correspondent, Lisa Mateo, right now. Okay, she's wearing Vivienne Westwood, which we can go with. We love Vivienne Westwood. Very, very brave couture in the United Kingdom. And, of course, obligatory Kansas City Chief Red.
Yes, Chiefs Red.
I mean, there's a real splash here, even though she came up trophy less.
Trophy less. She's got enough. She can't complain.
It's a reputation-coded look. I have no idea what that means.
I don't know. She does look good. I will give it that.
She's announcing
she looks amazing.
The release of maybe that's her next album, Reputation, is well. We thank Damien Sassar.
It's all about the red carpet.
Who
wins the red carpet? That's what the important stuff is.
Well, I watched some of that, but Paul, it's not the same as it used to be. I mean, plain and simple. It's the disjoint of younger people, middle people, older people.
Yeah.
In Grammys, Oscars, and
but I love the fact that we had some young folks at our house over the weekend, and they're listening to music all the time, which is great. I mean, so it's just different stuff, different folks, but the young folks they're all in good shape.
Lisa Mateo, thank you for that. Our Oscar correspondent, Lisa Mateo, will have much more from her as we stagger into award season. Futures at negative 101, 1.7%. The VIX 19.64. From New York City, Bloomberg surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this futures report sponsored by IBKR. Will the year-over-year change in the U.S. PPI exceed 3% in February 2025? At IBKR Forecast Trader, the yes was recently at 39%. What's your take? Trade your prediction at ibkr.com/forecast. All right, we've got futures lower, the dollar, oil on the rise. This is after President Trump levied tariffs on Canada, Mexico, China. Those set to take effect tomorrow. Let's start with NASDAQ futures up, down more than 1.5%, 372 points. Dow futures down 1.5%, 667 points, and S&P futures down 99. We have the 2-year yield at 4.24%. That's up 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.50%, and that's down 3 basis points. Taking that global look, Stock 600 down more than 1%. The DAX in Germany down more than 1.5%. Same for the CAC in Paris. The FTSE in London down nearly 1.5%. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.6%. We have the Mexican peso down more than 1%. Canadian dollar down 0.7% at 146.54 against the dollar. And we'll go to the euro, down nearly 1% at 102.63 against the dollar. So we talked about autos, some of the other tariff-exposed stocks like chip stocks. NVIDIA down 4%. We have Broadcom down 2%. The agriculture market also on edge. So you have shares of farming equipment maker Deere down 3%. Constellation Brands, the importer of Modelo, Corona beers down 7%. And finally, Vancouver-based Lululemon down 3%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. Wherever you get your podcasts, I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Yeah, Lisa, we got to fold this into the tariff debate. I mean, if it's an import from Italy, from Milan, and it's Cesar Casadei, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Casadei, Casadei shoes and sandals. Lisa, I know you know this, pop at $1,000 for a little sandal like Taylor was wearing last night.
But Taylor can afford it.
But Taylor's wearing an import
from
Italy. Are we going to put a tariff on Taylor Swift's sandals that went with her Vivienne Westwood dress?
I don't think she would be that happy about it.
I'm drinking Barbaresco these days, so if they put that slap a tariff on my favorite Italian grape, this is going to be a problem here.
And they're going to slap it on your
grape.
Vespa.
Yeah, the Vespa, of course.
And I mean, you see it again, folks, in Euro. We barely got to 102.63 and an assumption to parity as well. I mean, I don't know. That's where we are. Thank you for that, Lisa Mateo, our Oscar correspondent here. Taylor, she didn't win anything last night.
No, but she's a winner in life.
There we are. Okay, and they're just talking her new album as well. Matt Mishkin going, am I on the right network? Matt Mishkin joins us, co-chief investment strategist at John Hancock this morning. Matt, I dare say at some point this morning you have to publish. What will you write?
We wrote about the dollar strengthening, Tom, and really using the dollar as a hedge against this tariff risk. The dollar has mitigated some of its strength this morning. I think it might be sniffing out a deal or some sort of discussion. But at the end of the day, we've been long the dollar and looking at bonds as a secondary hedge. Bonds are holding up okay this morning and acting like a little bit of a diversifier. But the dollar's the best way to hedge this in our view.
We're 2 minutes away from the opening bell. We'll go to that, Matt. But first, Joe Weisenthal saying the tape's really not that bad. Are you surprised at the resiliency here given the tariff gloom?
So the biggest risk to us is the lack of risk being priced in. We really have gone over the last several months pricing in perfection, from high yield spreads hitting near the lows since 2007 to equities reaching 27 times on a trailing PE, crypto markets hitting all-time highs. And so we didn't have much of a buffer going into this valuation or market sentiment. So to us, that's part of the reason why this is the way it is. But for us, this reaction's about right. It could be a detriment to growth. We're watching the Treasury market. The fact that yields are down, that actually signals to us it's less about inflation. It's more about weakening growth.
Matt, real quickly, what's your 2025 fixed income call here?
We do see the Fed actually holding in the first half, but then going back to cutting in the second half. We believe we are experiencing a mini economic cycle from the election. Post-election we got to see this. How much is the pull through before the tariffs were implemented of inventory and business activity? But if that fades from here and the sentiment actually turns more negative, we actually think the Fed's going to be cutting more than the market expects in the back half. And bonds actually could provide mid-single digits to even potentially high single-digit returns on the high-quality side.
Matt Mishkin with us, with John Hancock. We'll continue with Mr. Mishkin here in a moment. An extraordinary day in the markets. 3 big figures on the VIX, out to 19.61. I agree with Damian Sassower. The 10-year real yield is important, under 205 to 4 digits, 2.0499. A 199 print on 10-year real yield would be something. We're not there. In the currency space, dollar strength as you would expect. Euro 102.61 stable. Euro yen showing yen resiliency versus the euro. But really, and I think Lisa Mateo said it best, Paul, the idea here of it's earnings season.
Yep.
And it continues. The Tyson Foods doing well this morning as well.
Them, chicken.
We need to get the market open amid this news flow from Washington. No one better than our Lisa Mateo.
You've got it. And we also got a Mag 7 mania continuing this week, too, with Alphabet and Amazon. So how are these markets going to open ahead of this possible Tariff Tuesday? Let's take a look right now. S&P 500 down more than 1.5%, 100 points, 5,940. The Dow down more than 1%, 548 points, 43,992. And the NASDAQ down more than 2%, 419 points, 19,211. We go to the 2-year yield, 4.24%, up 4 basis points. And the 10-year yield, 4.50%, down 3 basis points. We head over to the Stock 600, still down more than 1%. The DAX in Germany down 1.5%. Same for the CAC in Paris, and the FTSE in London down nearly 1.5%. We have to look at the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, up 0.6%. You have the Mexican peso down more than 1%. Canadian dollar down 0.8%. 146.71 against the dollar. And moving down to the euro, down 1% at 102.60 against the dollar. Also, Bitcoin lower, down just over 94,000 at the open. Want to check in with those auto stocks because they've really been taking a beating this morning. GM down 5%, Ford down 3%, and Tesla off about 4%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much, Elise. We continue with Matt Miskin right now with John Hancock as well. Man, how do you play the news flow? Do you just sit aside and wait 1, 2, 3 days, or can you be bolder on a Monday morning?
I think you're going to get yourself twisted up like a pretzel if you're trying to trade these headlines. You're going to basically be finding yourself all over the place, and there could be a deal done this morning. There could be a phone call and lo and behold, there's a deal done, and the next thing you know, things are off to the races here. You don't want to get yourself off sides. You really still want to focus on the fundamentals. We do like quality stocks. Last year and the end of the year, they didn't do as well. We actually use relative value compared to some of the junkier, lower quality parts of the market. And even on the bond side, high yield looks expensive to us. Move up in quality there, but that's the best protection. And then hold pat, because it's too hard to trade this.
So, Matt, if we step back here and think about asset allocation, how do you guys think about that asset allocation coming into a year where we've had 2 years where the S&P 500 has delivered north of 20% return?
Yeah, there's only 4 times where the S&P 500 has had double back-to-back 25+% returns. The only time that it replicated that on the third year was 1999. So really, we need 2025 to be 1999 to see that type of return. January wasn't that dry of a January.
No.
Actually, markets did pretty well, but now this kind of risk-off tone suggests, I don't know if 1999 can happen here. That's, again, why we're actually moving from quality growth to quality value, and, again, moving up in quality on the fixed income side.
Matt, thanks so much for the time. Really love it around the market opening as well. Matt Miskin with us. He's with the John Hancock Company as people adapt and adjust. Paul, I'd say we're basically waiting for news flow. We got some out of Ontario.
Yep.
And we just have to...
Yeah, we'll see what type of...
wait and see.
Yeah, so what type of retaliations we see either today or tomorrow or in the days ahead from the various countries, and to what extent does the president want to broaden some of these tariff targets to perhaps some of our other trading partners, say Europe, for example. So we'll see how that plays out. But right now, the market's kind of off the lows, Tom, although still trading a little bit heavy here with the S&P 500 off, futures off 1.4%, the NASDAQ off 1.7%.
What does Canada or Mexico or China, for that matter, do with the goods coming out of Hollywood? Do they block them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know. That would be a symbolic effort, certainly.
Do you put a tariff on Moana 3?
I don't know. It's interesting, but it's certainly one of the exports that the U.S. has around the world. Around the world, certainly.
But this comes down to service versus goods.
Yeah.
Henrietta Trey's talked about that.
Yeah, exactly. But we'll see how this messaging plays out over the next several days, in terms of kind of where we go with the tariffs and kind of how some of the retaliations come from various countries.
Right now, I'm going to call it a churn, and I'm going to suggest it's a little bit fragile as well. The Dow, negative 417. We're open for trading. And we're coming off futures here a little bit to a worser outcome, as they say. VIX is better. The VIX goes out to a 20. It's 18.88, so a little more constructive tape witnessed by the VIX. Bitcoin back up to 96,000. All in all, a churny market. Waiting for news from Bloomberg. From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got stocks really getting beat up over tariff concerns and how they're going to affect the global economic growth, also affect also fuel inflation on top of that. So we'll start with the NASDAQ, down 1.5%, 308 points. We have the Dow, that's off about 1%, 466 points. The S&P 500 down 1%, about 80 points. The 2-year yield at 4.24%. That's up 4 basis points. We have the yield on the 10-year 4.50%, and that's down 4 basis points. To commodities, we have Brent crude up about 0.8%, $76 a barrel. WTI crude $73 a barrel. We have COMEX gold $2,856 an ounce. To currencies, the Bloomberg dollar spot index up about 0.6%. We have the Mexican peso down 1.5%. The Canadian dollar lower at 146.63 against the dollar. We go to the euro down 1% at 102.56 against the dollar. Now, moving aside from tariffs, we also have other news going on. Beyond, that's the owner of Bed Bath & Beyond. Well, it's set to acquire the global rights of the Bye Bye Baby brand for $5 million. Those shares are higher this morning. And then we go to Cigna. They're responding to the wave of online anger at health insurers. The company says it's going to tie its executive pay to customer satisfaction. And to earnings we go. Tyson Foods up about 0.5%. It raised its profit outlook. Stronger chicken profits offset those losses in their beef business. And we can't forget Mag 7 mania continues this week. Alphabet tomorrow, Amazon on Thursday. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
I mean, you mentioned Bye Bye Baby. I mean, this could be a Dow equivalent. Do you know what people with brand new babies spend on strollers?
Yes, over $1,000. I just went to a shower this weekend.
Oh, you did? Did you?
Did, yes.
Tell us about that.
The registry was enormous, but yeah, strollers over $1,000. That's not even to insert the
to get the offspring down the street.
In it. Yes.
What is it to protect the child from the elements?
Yeah, I think it's just all name
all
clout
electronics.
on the street.
It was one of the big. I mean, it literally caused. It's painful. I think we need to go to somebody expert on this.
Yeah, I don't know.
Joining us now, Lori Calvasina here, with the small stocks down 2%, is as well. I mean, Lori, to cut to the chase, can strollers move the needle on export-import dynamics?
I don't know about strollers, Tom. I don't think I ever paid $1,000 for either one of mine.
Smart.
I'm not gonna lie.
There's one here. I kid you not, folks. The Junama Pilot Collection Baby Pram is $2,300.
Nice. That's what we're talking about. In style.
And there's a small cap out there making that puppy right now. Is this an opportunity, Lori Calvasina? I mean, you're with the Royal Bank of Canada. Is this an opportunity to acquire stocks?
Look, it's always a good day to buy stocks, right? Look, I think the reality is that we're seeing a little bit of a sell-off today. It could have been worse. I do think that we've had some valuation problems in the market. I do think we've had some froth in the market. If you look at the CFTC data on U.S. equity future positioning, I do still think it's going to be a good year in the equity market if we kind of get through this issue. And I've told people, common talking point today has been, look, if you think about my S&P 500 forecast, 6,600 at the end of the year, not because of tariffs specifically, but I have baked into that number the idea of a 5 to 10% drawdown. We do have a bear case ready to go of 57.75 should certain conditions be met. Those conditions have not been met, but there are things we have to keep an eye on. 10-year yields, how do they react to the environment we're in right now? What about these vibes? We've been hearing about these vibes that were supposed to be so fantastic and explode post-election, and yet we've had 2 disappointing prints on the consumer sentiment and confidence surveys. And now we've got businesses talking a lot about uncertainty from the tariffs denting some of the post-election optimism. So there are things we've got to watch. We've got to be vigilant. I think we're still on a good path. Are the odds that we could get knocked off that path up? Yeah, they're up a little bit.
Lori, how important are earnings to the 2025 performance in this market? Because it just doesn't feel like I'm going to get that much from the Federal Reserve in terms of rate cuts. So it feels like I need to rely upon earnings maybe a little bit more.
I think that's fair, Paul. And, we sort of have said this for 2 reasons. Number one, if we do our modeling on the valuation side and plug in current assumptions, whether it's my guys at RBC or the consensus numbers on things like inflation, the Fed, 10-year yields, I can't come up with that rosy of a number for the market at the end of the year. Valuations have moved a lot, and they've done it on the backs of inflation ramping down. And now it looks like inflation, there may be some upside pressures there. So I think it's tough from that perspective. And if you just take a more kind of simplistic analysis and look at a forward PE on the S&P 500, and you can all these different versions, all my charts are showing me that we've kind of hit a ceiling and we're moving down a little bit. So I think valuation expansion is tough to come by. earnings matter. Margin expectations have been coming down. I do think that there are potential negative impacts to earnings, both from demand, margins, a variety. The dollar is something else to watch from this tariff situation, and things like the dollar are already starting to pinch.
Is there a small cap Mag 7?
Oh, I think there are names that small cap investors end up crowding into. They don't like the fact that they do it, which is one of the things I love about the small cap investment community. But, I do think we've had a little bit of a squeeze on quality. And what I mean by that is you've seen just the quality characteristics of the Russell 2000 degrade, nearly half of its negative earners, a lot of things that are kind of low liquidity, tiny market cap that, frankly, active managers just can't buy. And so they do tend to gravitate to kind of the bigger small caps, more liquidity, higher quality stats, but it's more expansive than a Mag 7.
It's been wonderful. Too short a visit. Lori Calvasina, thank you so much. With RBC Capital Markets, she'll be publishing in the coming hours and sliding into tomorrow after the midnight tariff call on what it means for stocks, what it means for small caps, negative 2.4% right now, NASDAQ negative 1.7%, Dow negative 546%. Standard & Poor's 500, negative 93 now, down 1.5%. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. President Donald Trump says Americans could feel some pain from the emerging trade war triggered by his tariffs against Canada, Mexico, and China.
Canada's been very tough on oil, on energy. They don't allow our farm products in, essentially. They don't allow a lot of things in, and we allow everything to come in. It's been a one-way street.
Both Canada and Mexico have pledged to retaliate if Trump follows through on his threats set to launch tomorrow. Ontario's premier said his government is ending its contract with Starlink, the Elon Musk-controlled satellite company, following the tariffs. And the province will also ban U.S. companies from provincial contracts until the tariffs are removed. Elon Musk now has access to the federal government's funding agencies after President Trump granted him access to the U.S. Treasury Department. Musk, speaking on the first Dogecast, the Spaces event on X, is going after congressionally approved programs with foreign assistance going through U.S. aid and his main focus.
The reason for that, as opposed to simply, trying to do some minor house cleaning, is that as we dug into USAID, it became apparent that what we have here is not an apple with a worm in it, but we have actually just a bowl of worms.
Musk went on to say USAID is a criminal organization and it's time for it to die. The World Cup kiss trial of the former president of the Royal Spanish Football Federation, Luis Rubiales, began today in Madrid. Star athlete Jenny Hermoso was the first witness and said to kiss Rubiales at the 2023 World Cup, "Staying one of the happiest days of my life." Rubiales kissed Hermosa on the lips while the soccer players received their World Cup medals in Australia, triggering protest and calls for his resignation. He denies any wrongdoing. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Getting the markets open here. The Dow negative 500, 1.3% down. Paul, it's just simply the tape is not as grim as 7 a.m.
Not as grim, but again, it reflects some uncertainty into the market, uncertainty with some of our largest trading partners, and I think the market's trying to just get a sense of how broad this will be, what the retaliations will be from some of our trading partners, and how long these tariffs will remain in place. So a lot of uncertainty out there, and that's what you get, 1.5% sell-off in the S&P.
I look at Google earnings this afternoon, out to a high yesterday, tomorrow. Thank you, Ari. Google tomorrow, and then out to a high. It's just pulled back a little bit today. I'm going to call it from 207 down to 202 on Google, on Alphabet, and it's a huge 2 standard deviation Mag 7 move up.
Yeah, Google,
no other way to put it.
$2.5 billion market capitalization. The stock over the past 12 months is up about 40%. So despite some of the concerns that AI may face for the search business, the stock's still trading really well.
Michael Barr whispered in my ear in the depths of COVID. He said, "Tom, Google. It's up 300%.
Sure.
300%. I should have listened to Michael. From New York, it's Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone, and what a morning's been. Thanks to our team working all last night, working on tariff guests as well. We had scheduled Eric Balchunas. We're keeping this conversation for two reasons. One, we'll get to the Philadelphia Eagles in a moment. Taylor was wearing red last night. Balchunas is wearing green.
I think there
today.
might be a proposal.
It's like,
keeping
it's
an eye on that.
Same kind of thing here. We'll get to the Eagles in a moment, but joining us from Philadelphia in our studios, Eric Balchunas. I'll just cut to the chase. Is there a way to play the tariff madness with ETFs? Is it the double leveraged tariff fund?
It's funny, when Trump 1.0 was going on, they launched a trade war ETF.
Okay.
But it was sadly closed within 6 months. It just didn't take off. They try to sometimes put ETFs out for the news cycle, but there is a reshoring ETF, and iShares has one called MADE, which is a manufacturing ETF. So if you think the tariff thing is related to possibly more manufacturing, then that MADE is one of those that's designed for this. But I would say if you're thinking about a sell-off, obviously we see people go into something like SH, which is the one-time inverse S&P.
You have gorgeous charts of the flows going in. Are flows going into these unique marketing ETFs, or are they just still going into some big SPX number?
No, there's like about 10% that I would call, again, hot sauce, marketing, whatever you want to call it. It's a viable lane. And again, the reason it's a viable lane is that over the past 15 years, a lot of investors got married to a cheap index fund, and they set it and forget it. They're not going to leave it. They just got to wait 30 years for the magic of compounding. In the meantime, though, they're a little bored. And that's where I think some of this stuff has an audience, whether it's leverage or thematic. People are looking to speculate a little with a small portion of the portfolio. So the flows do go in. In my take, it's evolution of active. A lot of active has gone from, hey, let me try to beat the S&P by 2 bips. That money's gone to passive. Now it's like, hey, let me serve you something that's wildly different that could go up like 4x.
All right, but this is the world you live in. Like I lived in with 3-4% fees. We were making money hand over fist. Now you're trolling around. Vanguard's average fee is now just 0.07% after biggest ever cut. What's that all about? Where are we going? Are we going to zero?
Listen, I wrote the Bogle effect.
I know you.
I could have called it the Vanguard effect, but to me, the anomaly in physics is Jack Bogle. He, a weird dude, purposely set up a company where all future profits would go to the investors and not his pockets. Nobody's ever done that, and still, it's the only mutual loan company. And so every time they get new money, they have to figure out how to spend it, and the people who vote are representing the investors, and they're like, it's like a co-op. Hey, let's vote to make the fees cheaper for us. That gives one master, not two, and that's the whole magic of Vanguard.
Thank God I only got 1 minute left. Chiefs-Eagles is 6-5 over time, but with Coach Reed, the Chiefs are 4-1 as well. Does he have an advantage coaching the Chiefs because he knows what the Eagles are doing? I don't buy it.
Not now. I mean, so much has changed, and there's one big change. Saquon Barkley. If you stop him, then you got to stop A.J. Brown.
How do you
stop
Barkley?
him, then you have to just put a bunch of people up on the line. Then that leaves A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith to wreak havoc over there, and we got a good tight end. You cannot stop all of us. Now, they have similar qualities. in my view, they got these little wide receivers that do death by 1,000 cuts, 8 yards, 8 yards, 8 yards. I say take that away. Right. Make Patrick Mahomes beat you with his arm. He's not a good long ball thrower. That's how I would do the D against the Chiefs.
That's solid right there.
It's solid. I mean, it's great. That's why he's here. I got 12 seconds. Do the Eagles have a Taylor Swift equivalent?
I don't know. Bradley Cooper. Bradley Cooper. I guess the best I can do. I just think the Philly fan
They're blue
is
collar.
enough.
You guys are blue collar.
We are. We're nuts.
Hardworking.
Yeah.
Cheesesteak eating. Scrapple
It means more to
eating.
us.
Yep, exactly.
It's time. This is the end of the Chiefs dynasty. I'm calling it now.
Wow.
It's over.
Please, if you can, if you're not work from home for the next 6 days, try to come back. Eric Belchunas, #1 on ETFs worldwide for Bloomberg. Look for his work. Grammy winners for Tom Elmhurst, Adele, good morning.